Chapter 2:18. Immortals believe in it, but not in it. Go has no golden bones, not listed on the pill platform. Disciples pass on the fasting method, pill burning scripture. Only asking for hard work, in 100 years you will not succeed. Sad dream of immortals, a dream that misleads a lifetime. Sad dream of immortals, a dream that misleads a lifetime. Compared to the Song of Everlasting Regret, by G.'s Dream of Immortals was not very famous. The whole poem was about a person who dreamed that he ascended on a white crane and met the Jade Emperor. The Jade Emperor said that he had the talent to cultivate immortality, so he abandoned his wife and daughter and hid in the mountains for decades. However, he failed to become an immortal and wasted his life. Wasn't the person standing in front of Chen Shi the real-life dream of immortals? If the jade door opened, it meant that he had successfully condensed his chi and stepped into the path of immortality. This person actually managed to find the right direction by relying on his own groping. Such talent and aptitude really made people exclaim in admiration. But unfortunately, when one's strength was limited, one could only do one's best and wait for destiny. Now that the spiritual chi of heaven and earth had recovered and was so abundant, by refining the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, one could gradually accumulate true essence and then use it to break through the jade door. Once this door opened, one could naturally step into the early stage of chi refinement. Although he had found the right direction, his cultivation method was wrong, which led him to go astray and create this extremely evil 5-element soul refining technique. Just like the great star-sucking technique, it seemed to allow one's cultivation to progress rapidly, but in reality, it was not far from chi deviation. Therefore, Chen Shi asked seriously, "May I know your name, sir?" Hearing this, the person laughed and said, "My surname is Sun, and my name is Wen. I am of the lineage of the virtuous master, and have a history of nearly 2,000 years. Mr. Sun, you said that if the jade door opened, one would step into the path of immortality. Is this the so-called immortal secret technique?" After saying this, Chen Shi pointed at the strange layout in the cave. He had a half-smile on his face. It looked like he was asking for guidance, but in fact, he was questioning. As expected, when Sun Wen heard Chen Shi's question, his expression suddenly froze. But then, he suddenly laughed even louder than before. "Fellow Taoist, that's a good question. This old man has been searching for the Tao of immortality for more than 60 years. It was only a few years ago that I finally figured it out. Actually, there are no immortals in this world." "No immortals? Then why did you say you stepped onto the immortal Tao? Everyone says that one can ascend to immortality as soon as the heavenly gate is opened. Then I would like to ask, in the past 100 years, has anyone ascended to immortality? Successfully flew into the gate of heaven? I'm afraid they haven't even seen the shadow of the heavenly gate. They worship ancient books all day long as if they're their ancestors. Can they become immortals just like that?" Hearing this, Chen Shi looked at Sun Wen thoughtfully and didn't say anything. When Sun Wen saw his expression, he immediately smiled proudly and said, "In fact, as far as this old man knows, this celestial being is not the end, but the starting point." As soon as these words were spoken, they resounded throughout the cave like the sound of metal being thrown to the ground. The celestial being was not the end, but the starting point. In a sense, this statement was not wrong. The celestial being was almost above the foundation establishment stage and below the Jindan stage. They who had yet to condense a golden core could only be regarded as low-level cultivators. They had not touched the threshold of the immortal Tao at all. At this point, Sun Wen suddenly let out a burst of strange laughter as if he was mocking something. He said with a look of disdain, "Those people keep talking about Elysium all day long and count on Elysium for everything. They're completely putting the cart before the horse. The path of flowers has never been swept by a destined guest, but the gate of heaven has been opened for you from now on. It's not that one can only ascend to immortality after opening the gate of heaven, but that the gate of heaven will only be opened for you when one's cultivation has succeeded." Very insightful. Chen Shi nodded sincerely, expressing his agreement with Sun Wen's words. Sun Wen's point of view was completely different from the village's point of view. Clearly, there was still a lot of debate about the legend of the gate of heaven in this world. She didn't say anything. After Sun Wen finished his last sentence, he suddenly closed his mouth and looked at him with a faint smile. The cave was strangely quiet. A gust of cold wind came from nowhere. When the wind blew, the three red-clothed people hanging on the beams suddenly started to sway. It looked like three red-clothed female ghosts were dancing in the cave. She held the blood-thorn grass and stood casually not far from the cave entrance. Sun Wen looked at the bold young man in front of him with a half-smile. After a moment of silence, She finally broke the silence. "I have another question to ask." "Please speak." "Sir, why are you telling me these things?" Hearing this, Sun Wen suddenly laughed and said, "This old man has been in seclusion for a long time, and it's been many years since I've chatted with someone like today." Speaking of this, Sun Wen's expression changed, and a fierce light appeared in his eyes. He said coldly, "You and I can be considered to be fated, but unfortunately, in addition to trespassing on my cave residence today, you also destroyed the immortal grass that I have painstakingly cultivated for many years. I'm afraid you can only pay for this with your life." Why would he say so much to a young man he didn't know? Wasn't it because he had created a peerless cultivation method, but there was no way to publicize it? Only the dead could keep a secret. Therefore, from the moment she stepped into the cave, Sun Wen had no intention of letting him leave alive. Seeing this, she couldn't help but sigh deeply and said, "Sir, you have great talent, but it's a pity that you've gone astray." "What a pity." With that, he held the blood-thorn grass with his right hand and raised his left hand, making an inviting gesture to Sun Wen. Seeing this, Sun Wen's face turned cold, and he couldn't figure out this young man's background. This was obviously his immortal's cave, yet this young man had such a confident appearance. Could it be that he had some backing? Thinking of this, Sun Wen frowned and asked, "Who exactly are you?" "Me?" She smiled, and suddenly an idea popped up in his mind, so he said to Sun Wen, "Wu Lian, Special Affairs Department." Special Affairs Department, Special Affairs Department Office. Compared to the Emergency Department, the Special Affairs Department was the real main department of the Wu Lian. Obviously, Sun Wen wasn't really cut off from the world, so when he heard she say the word Special Affairs Department, his face instantly darkened, and he immediately rushed towards Shi. In the eyes of Hua Xia's cultivators, the word Wu Lian was a very unlucky existence. This organization was part of the country's power, and once Sun Wen's secret was discovered by the Wu Lian, it would be no different from being stuck with dog skin plaster. Unless he left Hua Xia, what awaited him would be the Wu Lian's endless pursuit. After dealing with this young man, he would have to find another place to cultivate in seclusion. Sun Wen was slightly different from great-granduncle. Great-granduncle was a martial artist, from the outside to the inside. Sun Wen was a sorcerer, from the inside to the outside. Therefore, their fighting styles were very different. When Sun Wen rushed towards Shi, he suddenly waved his right hand, his 5 fingers forming a claw, and fiercely clawed at Shi. A black shadow suddenly flew out from his hand. Then, the black shadow seemed to have turned into a malicious spirit, its face contorted as it screamed. The ghost didn't make any sound, but at this moment, a sharp, ear-piercing howl suddenly rang in Shi's mind. The sound was like the sound of 2 pieces of foam rubbing against each other. It was exceptionally harsh and unpleasant to the ear, and could instantly cause goosebumps to rise on anyone who heard it. Using a killing move right from the start, Sun Wen really wasn't prepared to let this young man leave alive today. Yellow Sky Path of Spirits. Samsara Impermanence. The first of every month, the routine of asking for monthly votes. Chapter 219. Sun Wen's claw was very similar to the 9-yin white bone claw. As he waved his claw, a ghost shadow suddenly appeared in the air and went straight for Shi. Looking at the way the ghost was moving, it was obvious that this move must be a combination of internal and external attacks. Not only could it hurt the enemy's body physically, but it could also affect the enemy's soul spiritually. It was extremely evil. The malicious ghosts kept howling, and invisible sound waves came one after another. Shi was not affected at all. He stood in place with a smile, and his heart was constantly trying to figure out Sun Wen's cultivation method. When the black shadow was about to pounce on him, Chen Shi finally made a move. He raised his left hand and pointed a finger at it. That black shadow was like a shadow that had seen the sun. It screamed miserably and disappeared in midair. Sun Wen could not help but raise his eyebrows when he saw this. He knew that he had encountered a tough opponent today. After Sun Wen called himself a virtuous teacher, he was actually the successor of Zhang Jiao. As a top-notch necromancer after Su Fu, Zhang Jiao had attained a peerless cultivation base with the art of peace and peace that he had obtained from an unknown source. Because of that, he was honored as a great teacher. The impermanence of samsara came from the Taiping essential technique, and it was an upgraded version that Sun Wen improved with the 5 elements soul refining technique. He did not expect that Chen Shi could easily break it with one finger. How could Sun Wen not be surprised? How was this a young man? He was clearly an old monster who had a technique to retain his youthful appearance. In fact, Sun Wen was not a middle-aged man. He was born during the Daoguang era of the Qing dynasty and was already more than 180 years old. Sun Wen's talent was indeed far superior to ordinary people. As the only remaining successor of the Taiping path, he had already stepped into the soul conduit realm in his 40s under the guidance of his master. He was known as the Taiping Heavenly Master. After becoming a Heavenly Master, Sun Wen was not willing to be mediocre. Instead, he began to travel around to find a way to go further. Sun Wen was different from great-granduncle. He did not believe that the Heavenly Gate could allow people to ascend. Therefore, he had never counted on the Heavenly Gate. Instead, he had been quietly cultivating. He practiced diligently all day long, which made his cultivation far superior to great-granduncle. In fact, Sun Wen was only one step away from being able to form the 3 flowers and truly step into the golden core realm. With the revival of the spirit qi of heaven and earth, Sun Wen had also found a way to cultivate qi. Perhaps if he was given enough time, Sun Wen would be able to carve out a path of his own. Regardless of whether it was good or evil, as long as he could continue down this path, then it was the right path. Unfortunately, Sun Wen met Chen Shi today. He was like a walking steel plate in this world. Therefore, when Sun Wen saw that his move was easily broken by Chen Shi, he immediately stopped and asked with a frown, "Who are you?" "I've already told you. It's the Wu Lian Special Affairs Department." Sun Wen was clearly dissatisfied with this answer. Therefore, he coldly shouted in anger, pretending to be mysterious. "Since that's the case, I'll capture you first and then slowly interrogate you." After he finished speaking, Sun Wen's black robes began to flutter even though there was no wind. A strong storm suddenly blew in the cave. 2 long dragons of murderous aura rolled out from Sun Wen's sleeves like tornadoes in the desert, roaring as they rushed towards Chen Shi. These 2 tornadoes were actually formed by Sun Wen's magical power. In the process of rushing towards Chen Shi, the 2 tornadoes even intertwined with each other, turning into a sharp, cone-shaped cyclone. The cyclone spun rapidly like a sharp knife. Like a high-speed drill, when the cyclone rushed towards Chen Shi, it also tore a vacuum in the air. This move was monstrous, but when Chen Shi saw it, he shook his head in disappointment. Compared to the improved version of the samsara impermanence, this move did not have any special features. It looked powerful, but in fact, it was the simplest way to use vital essence. It was just using brute force to break through all techniques. This was also a method that Chen Shi often used. Perhaps he wanted to force Sun Wen to take out his trump card. So when the cyclone rushed towards him, Chen Shi raised his left hand, like fishing in the water. He directly reached into the center of the cyclone, and then, he squeezed hard. This fierce cyclone was like a poisonous snake that was pinched by him. After struggling helplessly for a while, it turned into countless bursts of energy and dissipated. The qi that scattered in all directions hit the rock walls of the cave, and like a machine gun, countless stones fell from the rock walls with a crackling sound. The rubble fell to the ground, and a rustling sound was heard. Under Sun Wen's incredulous gaze, Chen Shi calmly raised an index finger, then smiled slightly. "You still have one last chance to make a move, don't let me down." Hearing this, Sun Wen could not help but widen his eyes, the hair on his body stood up, and the expression on his face was like he had seen a ghost. It was no wonder he was afraid. The move just now was Sun Wen's own killing move. In terms of lethality, it was a bit stronger than the samsara impermanence. It was not that he was boasting, but as long as this move was used, even a great master in the gang state would be instantly turned into minced meat. But after Chen Shi put her hand in, she acted as if nothing had happened. Sun Wen couldn't help but have some thoughts of retreating. Who was this young man? Did he come here specifically for him? Because he could not figure out Chen Shi's background, the expression on Sun Wen's face became more and more dignified. When he saw that Chen Shi was still as calm as before, Sun Wen had to seriously consider Chen Shi's words. Last chance to make a move? Thinking of this, Sun Wen could not help but look at Chen Shi, as if he wanted to say something. But after hesitating for a moment, he just sighed deeply, and the expression on his face became quite complicated. Today was the yang year, the yang month, and the yang day. It was the rare time of the highest yang. The depths of the abandoned mine had become quite yin due to the lack of sunlight all day long. In addition to Sun Wen's arrangement, this place was now a place of extreme yin and extreme evil. Extreme yang time, extreme yin place. Extreme yin and extreme yang. He wanted to use this arrangement to help him break through to the celestial being realm, but he did not expect this arrangement to become his killing move in the end. Thinking of this, Sun Wen could not help but clench his teeth. He suddenly put his hands together in front of his chest and directly made various seals. As he kept making seals, a yin and yang formation slowly condensed and formed in front of his chest. Seeing this, Chen Shi was not anxious at all. He was now like a cat teasing a mouse. Because this was the first time Chen Shi came into contact with a necromancer, he wanted to thoroughly understand the cultivation system of the necromancer lineage. He only gave Sun Wen 3 chances to make a move. This was already the 3rd time. Sun Wen was a smart person, so naturally, he would not waste this opportunity. Therefore, when he began to focus and gather qi, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the vicinity suddenly shook violently. Sure enough, Sun Wen had comprehended the truth of heaven and earth and began to try to use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to cooperate with his casting. Probably because it was his first time using this move, Sun Wen took a long time to prepare. Chen Shi waited quietly. His curiosity was completely piqued by Sun Wen. He wanted to see what kind of amazing move a cultivation genius like Sun Wen would create. Because Earth was different from heavenly spiral, perhaps he could learn something from it? Chen Shi was looking forward to it. And Sun Wen did not disappoint him. When the yin and yang formation condensed in front of Sun Wen's chest, it immediately turned into a black and white yin and yang fish. Then, it began to slowly spin and flow. The yin and yang fish spun faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the 2 yin and yang fish seemed to have completely merged into one, turning into a hazy gray that represented chaos. Black and white blended and returned to chaos. At this moment, Sun Wen suddenly let out a roar. Immediately after, blood began to ooze out of his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears. Bleeding from all orifices. Seeing this, Chen Shi could not help but be stunned for a moment before he suddenly came back to his senses. Sun Wen was burning his blood essence. As expected. When Sun Wen began to burn his blood essence, the aura on his body suddenly rose and exploded. The yin and yang fish in front of his chest also completely turned into a gray ball of light because of the rapid rotation. Sun Wen let out another roar. His sleeves bulged like a dragon, and then he suddenly pushed the light ball outward. Then, the gray light ball suddenly carried an indescribable aura and directly pressed toward Chen Shi. Yin-Yang Calamity Mountain River Seal. Destroy. Chapter 220. Tai Chi gave birth to Yin and Yang gave birth to the 4 divisions, and the 4 divisions gave birth to the 8 trigrams. Tai Chi was the fusion of vitality before heaven and earth were separated. It was the beginning and the unity of the universe. Simply put, Tai Chi represented chaos and yin and yang. The 4 divisions were the 5 elements. Metal, wood, water, and fire represented north, south, east, and west respectively. Earth was in the center of the 4 divisions and did not exist in the cycle of the 4 divisions. Therefore, it was also called the central earth, representing heaven and earth. Only with heaven and earth would there be the 4 divisions. Without heaven and earth, there would naturally be no 4 divisions. Therefore, earth was the first of the 5 elements and the beginning of all things. The mountain and river seal belonged to the earth element. This was Sun Wen's strongest killing move. The moment the mountain and river seal was formed, Qin Shi could not help but raise his eyebrows. He could not help but have a serious expression on his face. Sun Wen had actually seen through the 5 elements and reversed yin and yang from the 4 divisions. From this, he had touched the true essence of Tai Chi with his strength as a peak diviner. He had actually struck out an attack that was not inferior to the divine generals when he burned his essence blood. Just this move alone was enough for Sun Wen to surpass many cultivators in this world. Just as the black and white yin-yang fish turned into a gray ball of light due to the high-speed rotation, Sun Wen's face deteriorated at a speed visible to the naked eye. Just now, he looked like a middle-aged man in his 40s. However, in the blink of an eye, his hair and beard were all white. He looked like an old man with half a foot in the ground. His haggard and weak appearance was somewhat similar to Zhao Guifan, who had lost her young soul and had her blood sucked by the blood thorns all day long. Blood flowed from his 7 orifices and his face was rapidly aging. However, Sun Wen's eyes suddenly flashed with joy. After pushing the gray ball of light towards Qin Shi, he couldn't hold it in anymore and let out a long howl of excitement. Success! The gray ball of light was formed by Sun Wen's true essence and Dharma power. It contained his lifetime of cultivation. It was like a ball of smoke in a bubble. As it flew toward Qin Shi, the ball of light seemed to be constantly rolling and rising. In terms of appearance, there was nothing strange about it. However, in Qin Shi's opinion, this ball of light was not simple. Sun Wen did not disappoint him. Thus, Qin Shi couldn't help but laugh. Earth element? You've come at the right time. Watch me use my lightning technique to break your earth element technique. The 5 elements mutually reinforce and counteract each other. Zhen represented thunder, and Sun represented wind. Zhen and Sun belonged to wood, and wood restrained earth. Thunder just so happened to restrain earth. After saying that, Qin Shi suddenly let go of the blood-thorn grass in his hand. Then, a blue light appeared in his hand out of thin air. In that instant, lightning appeared in the void, and thunder exploded. Qin Shi stood proudly with the thunderbolt in his hand. Since Sun Wen was not a celestial being, he would control his cultivation base to that of a celestial being. It was also a form of respect for him to deal with someone of the same level. Thunder versus Earth. 49 Forms of Heavenly Divination, Spell Chapter, Thunder Art of Delusion. Qin Shi was like a god descending, holding 2 thunderbolts in his hands. The blue lightning was like a venomous snake spitting out its tongue, constantly bubbling in Qin Shi's palm. When the gray ball of light flew towards him, Qin Shi opened his arms and fanned at the gray ball of light as if he was waving a banana fan. The thunderbolt and the gray ball collided in the air. In an instant, the aura energy shot out in all directions, and the surging true essence instantly set off an earth-shattering explosion in the cave. The abandoned mine that had long been dilapidated collapsed under the impact of the explosion, instantly turning into a pile of ruins. Ding! Qin Shi arrived at the 108 National Highway. At this moment, his phone suddenly rang. He picked up his phone and opened it. It was a push message from Tencent News. #Earthquake News February 24, 04, 17 a.m., a magnitude 3.2 earthquake occurred in the Xingxian area of Yu City. The tremor was not strong. The final result is based on the official report. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. After the Tangshan earthquake, 2 major earthquakes occurred in Huaxia in succession. This also meant that everyone began to pay more attention to news about earthquakes. It was estimated that the news of the earthquake in Yucheng would spread all over the country again tomorrow. After Qin Shi finished reading this news, he opened his contact list and found the name Qin Shueching in the contact list. Then, he dialed the number. Although it was 4 in the morning, after the phone rang twice, Qin Shueching directly picked up. Obviously, she was not sleeping, but cultivating. Hello? I just met a person. Sun Wen, do you know him? Sun Wen? I seem to have an impression of him, but I'm not very sure. Wait a moment, I'll check first. After saying that, Qin Shueching directly hung up the phone, obviously to make a call to verify. His sister-in-law was really swift and decisive. Qin Shi held the phone and waited for about 5 minutes before she called back. I found him. Sun Wen, from the Way of Peace, celestial level. He was born in the Daoguang era of the Qing dynasty. The last time he appeared was 20 years ago. At this point, Qin Shueching's tone could not help but be a little confused. She asked, "How did you meet such an old monster?" "Yeah, I don't know if I'm lucky or he's unlucky. Send someone here. He's a celestial after all. Capturing him for a vivisection seems to be a contribution to society, right?" After Qin Shi's voice fell, there was no sound from the other end of the phone for a long time. Qin Shueching thought that Qin Shi only met Sun Wen face to face, but now that she heard the meaning of his words, did this mean that he was going to capture Sun Wen alive? Capturing a celestial alive? Her sister-in-law was stunned for a while before she came back to her senses. Then, she jumped out of bed slightly agitatedly and said quickly, "I'll bring someone over right away." "What's the address?" "I'll send you the location." "Okay." Qin Shi would not joke with her on this kind of issue, so Qin Shueching did not have any doubts at all. After hanging up the phone, she left the Sai courtyard. The Wu Lian had been established for so many years, but they had never captured a celestial alive. Who knew how much credit this was? In fact, it was not that the Wu Lian could not capture a celestial. It was just that capturing a celestial required extremely careful arrangements, and it would even cause a lot of trouble. Right now, everything was about maintaining stability. Therefore, Wu Lian could only turn a blind eye to the existence of the celestials. As long as they did not go too far, the Wu Lian would not encircle and annihilate them. Qin Shi did not kill Sun Wen. Sun Wen was worthy of respect. After all, objectively speaking, if Sun Wen cultivated in the Tianyuan world for 500 years, perhaps his achievements would far surpass Qin Shi's. This was talent. Wasn't talent the most lacking in the 21st century? Although Sun Wen was not a good person, Qin Shi was not a judge after all. Handing him over to the Wu Lian and letting the Wu Lian deal with him was really a contribution to society. Chapter 221. The next day. Dawn had just broken when the villagers who had woken up early realized that there were many police cars in the village. Actually, the earthquake last night had awakened quite a number of people. However, Rain City had already experienced 2 major earthquakes, so a magnitude 3 or 4 earthquake was no different from a scratch in everyone's eyes. Therefore, the villagers who had woken up early did not discuss the earthquake last night. Instead, they gathered at the entrance to the mountain and whispered to each other about the situation on the mountain. The path up the mountain had already been sealed off by the police. Once the villagers got close, they would be politely asked to leave by the police. According to Old Wang, who had woken up at 6:00 to feed the chickens, he had even seen an armored vehicle drive up the mountain with his own eyes. Old Wang was a person who liked to talk big all the time, so everyone snorted at his words. If an armored vehicle was here, why didn't he say that there were planes and tanks? In the end, Old Wang had a flash of inspiration. He pointed at the new tire marks on the ground and asked everyone to examine them. Only then did everyone reluctantly believe his words. There were many families in Tongjiago who were professional truck drivers. Therefore, they were very knowledgeable about tire marks. The tire marks on the yellow dirt road did not seem to be left behind by a truck. The police were standing guard and the army was going up the mountain, so what exactly happened on the mountain? Everyone was very puzzled, but no one would tell them. When the little fellow woke up, it was already 9 o'clock in the morning. She had slept very deeply. Even after waking up, she was still in a daze for a long time. Chin Roying fetched a basin of hot water and helped the little fellow wash up in the living room. The little fellow turned her head in a daze and looked at the courtyard outside the old house. Her memory was still stuck on the night when she watched the movie. The little fellow blinked her eyes and looked outside the house. Then, she raised her head and looked at the decorations in the room. When she realized that she was in a completely unfamiliar environment, a puzzled expression appeared on her little face. Chin Roying put away the wash basin and hung up the towel. Just as she was about to bring her to the kitchen for breakfast, the little thing suddenly changed her face like a master of Sichuan opera. Her little mouth suddenly pouted, and she burst into tears with a wah. Her parents had actually taken her to such an unfamiliar place while she was asleep. This was something that the little guy could not accept at all. Perhaps it was because she was scared, or perhaps it was because she had been wronged, but the little girl was crying so hard that people couldn't help but want to hold her in their arms and take good care of her. Her crying alarmed everyone in the room. Auntie Zhang and Chen Shi were discussing the problem of making millet porridge in the kitchen. When they heard the commotion outside, they hurriedly walked out of the kitchen. When they came out, they just happened to see the little girl standing in the main hall with an aggrieved face and crying loudly. Chin Roying wanted to hug her, but she pushed her away with a pout. In the end, Auntie Zhang had to coax her. After telling her that this was her hometown, the little girl finally stopped crying. However, she was still unwilling to let Chen Shi and Chin Roying get close to her. Seeing this, the couple could only look at each other helplessly and smile. From the looks of it, they would have to coax her for a long time before she would forgive them. After breakfast, the family walked out of the house and prepared to see the situation outside. The army going up the mountain and the police standing guard was a big deal. Some of the villagers who liked to watch didn't even bother to eat their breakfast properly. They squatted by the roadside with a bowl of noodles and ate while going up the mountain. Xing County was not big, and there were only a few people in the County Public Security Bureau. These young men in police uniforms were very impressive, but in reality, they might be someone's nephew. The police were also people. Although they knew that they had to keep it a secret, they really couldn't stand the continuous questioning. Thus, some of the ignorant youngsters secretly revealed some of the things that had happened on the mountain. It was said that the abandoned coal mine on the mountain was the source of the earthquake. After the earthquake, the Geological Survey Bureau found a rare mineral underneath. This kind of mineral was very rare in the world. It was said that it could be used to make an atomic bomb. Therefore, when Shang Jing received the news, they immediately asked the County Public Security Bureau to cooperate with the armed police to guard the mine. The experts from Shangjing also flew over that night and were now exploring the mine. When did the people in the small mountain village hear such a mysterious story? Therefore, the whole village, men and women, old and young, gathered in front of the small road up the mountain. They all wanted to see what the mineral that could be used to make an atomic bomb looked like. If they could see the mineral with their own eyes, then they could boast to others in the future that the material to make an atomic bomb was dug out from their village. Chen Shi stood outside the crowd with the wronged little girl in his arms. After hearing the simple explanation of the situation, he was slightly speechless and laughed. Wu Yan was really amazing. In such a short time, he actually came up with such a decent excuse. Wu Yan probably did this kind of thing on a daily basis. After all, there were always a lot of things in this world that ordinary people could not achieve. They didn't even have the right to know. Most of the villagers were waiting at the intersection to see the atomic bomb. Chen Shi looked at the little girl for a while. After seeing that the little girl was still unhappy, he was ready to take her to dig winter bamboo shoots again. But just as Chen Shi and his family were about to leave, a saber-toothed tiger police armored vehicle suddenly drove down from the mountain. Seeing this, the villagers immediately let out a burst of enthusiastic cheers. The car was a special bulletproof car modified by a Ford Raptor. It was nearly 7 meters long, more than 3 meters tall, and weighed 6 tons. Its appearance was also very handsome. And behind this car, there were 3 warriors, which were real military off-road vehicles. The 4 cars slowly drove down from the mountain. Under the command of the police, the villagers retreated to the sides and made way for the cars. Chen Shi and his family stood on the 108 National Highway. While he was explaining to the little girl about the big cars in front of them, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly stopped in front of their family. Then, Qin Shueching walked out from the front passenger seat. The sister-in-law first greeted Qin Ruoying. After calling her sister, she turned to look at Chen Shi and said to him quite seriously, "Thank you." "It's nothing." Chen Shi waved his hand very casually, as if he didn't take this matter to heart at all. Hearing this, Qin Shueching nodded, then turned to look at Aunt Zhang and said to her very politely, "Aunt Zhang, I'm Qin Shueching. I've seen you in the courtyard before, but I was still young at that time. I don't know if you still remember me?" Yes, of course I remember." Aunt Zhang was confused by Qin Shueching. Why was Yingying's sister sitting in the car? Aunt Zhang was not very familiar with Qin Shueching, so she didn't know what to talk to her about. Seeing this, Chen Shi interrupted in time and said, "Are you busy? Do you want to have lunch before leaving?" Chapter 222. Okay. Her nod shocked everyone present. Chen Shi was just being polite. He did not expect his sister-in-law to take it seriously. Hearing this, Chen Shi had to first glance at the few warriors parked behind the armored vehicle, and then asked, "Aren't you on a mission?" "The mission is complete. I can go back to Shangjing in the afternoon." "Oh. Okay then, let's talk about it after dinner." Qin Shueching opened the door and said a few words to the driver of the armored vehicle. Then, she followed Chen Shi and his family to Aunt Zhang's old house. Her actions immediately caused the surrounding villagers to whisper to each other in whispers. "Hey, look, that girl came down from the armored vehicle." "Yeah, why is she following Zhang San? Is she Zhang San's relative? That's crazy. Didn't they say that these people were experts from Shangjing? That young girl is an expert. She's from Xiaoqiu, she's from Shangjing." Later, it was an insider who answered everyone's questions. Aunt Zhang had been working as a nanny in Shangjing for the past few years. The young couple that she brought yesterday was her former employer. The expert from Shangjing probably knew Aunt Zhang's employer, which was why she was with them. After all, a family that could afford a nanny was probably not an ordinary family. It was natural for them to know an expert from Shangjing. Everyone thought about it and felt relieved. After the commotion, his sister-in-law also came to eat. But the little girl was still angry. As soon as she returned to the courtyard, she pouted and said that she wanted to go home. Seeing this, Chen Shi had to use the same trick that he used yesterday. He was going to promise the little girl that she would only stay here for one night. If she still wanted to go home the next day, her parents would take her home. However, today's situation was different from yesterday. Yesterday, she wanted to see the village, so after being coaxed and tricked by Chen Shi, although she was a bit unwilling, she didn't flip out on the spot. The reason why she was so angry today was that she found herself in a village when she woke up. In the little girl's mind, her parents did not discuss with her before secretly bringing her here. This was disrespectful to her, so she naturally flew into a rage. She really did not want to stay here for another day. She screamed for a long time. In the end, under the persuasion of Aunt Zhang and Qin Ruoying, the little girl pouted and reluctantly agreed to Chen Shi's condition. "Then we'll stay for one night." "Just one night?" Pinky promise. This silly girl did not know that she had already fallen into her father's trap yesterday. So, Chen Shi brought her to the bamboo forest to dig winter bamboo shoots. This time, there was no Zhao Guifan, so the little girls digging very happily. When she heard that Chen Shi was going to use the winter bamboo shoots she dug out for lunch, the little thing was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth, and her hands and feet couldn't help but become much more nimble. It was a new experience for the little guy to eat the vegetables he picked with his own hands. Why were farmhouse dishes delicious? Wasn't it because she could just pick whatever she wanted to eat from the fields? Fresh ingredients were the prerequisite for cooking food. Not sure if it was a psychological effect, but today's bamboo forest did not seem as gloomy as yesterday. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. The bright sunlight shone on top of the bamboo forest, making the bamboo forest lush green, making people feel a trace of spring. The blood thorn was hung on the wall by Qinshi. It was red and it formed a sharp contrast with the golden corn skewers next to it. In the village, everyone liked to hang chili and corn outside the house. First, it was for ventilation and dryness. Second, it was a symbol. Chili symbolized red and corn symbolized a bountiful harvest. Both were good omens. In fact, when Chen Shi saw Sun Wen's 5 elements soul refining technique, he already knew why Aunt Zhang suddenly fainted. It turned out that Sun Wen used Aunt Zhang as the next batch of cultivation cauldrons. The principle of the 5 elements soul refining technique was actually similar to the blood-thorn grass. It was to absorb other people's soul and essence to strengthen oneself. It was precisely because Sun Wen came into contact with the blood-thorn grass that he comprehended the 5 elements soul refining technique. Because Aunt Zhang had taken the spirit cultivation pill, the remaining spirit energy in her body attracted Sun Wen's attention. Fortunately, Chen Shi noticed the abnormality in time and insisted on coming to Aunt Zhang's home to take a look. Otherwise, Aunt Zhang was afraid that she would inevitably follow in Zhao Guifen's footsteps. After putting down Sun Wen, Chen Shi also saved Zhao Guifen. Therefore, when he took the little fellow to dig bamboo shoots in the bamboo forest, a series of firecrackers suddenly sounded not far away. Wasn't it from Zhao Guifen's house? Looking at the situation, it was probably to celebrate Zhao Guifen's not crazy anymore. Zhao Guifen had a younger sister named Zhao Guixiang. She was Zhao Guifen's only relative in this world. The relationship between the two sisters was very good. Zhao Guifen had been crazy for so long, but Zhao Guixiang did not leave her and stayed at her house to take care of her. Early this morning, when Zhao Guixiang was about to help Zhao Guifen get up and wash up, Zhao Guifen suddenly called out her name, Guixiang? These 2 short words made Zhao Guixiang's eyes fill with tears on the spot. She hugged her sister and burst into tears. There was a custom in the countryside, which was to set off firecrackers when there was a joyous occasion. The firecrackers in Zhao Guifen's house sounded for a long time. In less than half an hour, the entire village knew that Zhao Guifen was no longer crazy. The crazy woman was no longer crazy, and everyone was happy for her. Zhao Guixiang was so happy that she even informed the entire village that she was going to hold a pig slaughtering feast to celebrate her sister's recovery. Aunt Zhang's family also received Zhao Guixiang's invitation. However, just when everyone was happy for Zhao Guifen's recovery, Chen Shi sighed silently. Zhao Guifen had lost her yang soul for a long time. Even he could only temporarily restore Zhao Guifen's consciousness and could not save her life. It was estimated that before the pig slaughtering feast began, Zhao Guixiang would have to change the funeral for her sister. Zhao Guifen was also a pitiful person. The culprit of everything was Sun Wen. Although Sun Wen was a talent, his unscrupulous behavior of disregarding human life also aroused Chen Shi's disgust. Therefore, when the little fellow volunteered to wash the winter bamboo shoots, Chen Shi found Qin Shueching and asked in detail how Wu Lian would deal with Sun Wen. After all, he was a diviner, so Wu Lian obviously only had one way to deal with Sun Wen. That was to persuade him to surrender and recruit him. As long as Sun Wen was willing to join the Wu Lian, then Wu Lian would be able to let bygones be bygones. This also made Chen Shi very dissatisfied. He thought that Wu Lian would dissect Sun Wen for research, but he did not expect to get this result. Chapter 223. How to deal with Sun Wen had become a problem. It would be a pity to kill him, but it would be difficult to resolve the hatred in his heart if he didn't kill him. Using living people to cultivate and turning them into idiots was an evil art that went against the harmony of the heavens. He would definitely suffer retribution. Chen Shi was probably Sun Wen's savior. Since that was the case, Chen Shi could only enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and let Sun Wen experience Zhao Guifen's pain. Thus, Chen Shi specially refined a pill for Sun Wen. For this reason, he even used a bit of blood-thorn grass. It could be said that wool comes from a sheep's back. Heart-devouring ants. However, they weren't ants. They were a type of pill, or rather, poison. When someone consumed this pill, they would feel as if their entire body was being bitten by fire ants every half an hour. The heart-wrenching pain didn't come from the body, but from the soul. Thus, it couldn't be described with words. It was densely packed, as if every inch of their skin was being burned by fire and pierced by needles. Every time the pill took effect, the poisoned person would feel a pain worse than death. They could only lie on the ground weakly, struggling and praying for the pill's effect to pass quickly. This pill came from the most poisonous sect in Heavenly Spiral. It was also developed by them to punish disciples who committed grave mistakes. It didn't harm their lives, but it also made them feel a pain worse than death. It made them feel fear from the bottom of their hearts, and they would never dare to commit the same mistake again. Although this pill couldn't kill people, it was said that many disciples couldn't withstand the endless heart-wrenching torture and chose to commit suicide to seek relief. He didn't know if Sun Wen could withstand this kind of torture. Chen Shi only hoped that Sun Wen could be strong and not be played to death. If Sun Wen died, it might really be a great loss to the Wu Yan. Lunch was authentic farmhouse food. Because Auntie Zhang's house didn't have any natural gas or induction cookers, the old house naturally used a firewood stove. Perhaps it was a psychological effect, but the food made from the firewood stove seemed to be exceptionally fragrant. The little fellow sniffed and picked up a piece of bamboo shoot. After tasting it, she immediately pointed at the plate of bamboo shoots fried with meat and laughed happily. "I dug this. Good, good, good. Let's see what you're capable of. Come, eat more." Auntie Zhang smiled and patted her little head. After giving her a piece of lean meat, she gestured for her to sit properly. It had been a long time since the old house had been so lively. Aunt Zhang's family of 3, Little Bean's family of 3, Qin Shi's family of 3, and Qin Shueching's family of 3, this meal was really lively. The table was filled with authentic farmhouse dishes. The little girl giggled as she ate. She seemed to have completely forgotten that she was insisting on going home just a moment ago. In fact, not only were the vegetables delicious, even the rice was exceptionally delicious. This was because Auntie Zhang's cooking utensils were not electric cookers, but retorts. It was the 21st century. Every household used an electric cooker to cook rice, so many people didn't even know what a retorter was. In the past, a wooden bucket was used to cook rice, and that bucket was called a retorter. The rice steamed with a retorter was called retorted rice, and the taste was completely different from the rice steamed in an electric cooker. Steaming rice in an electric cooker was very simple. Put an appropriate amount of rice and water in it, cover it with a lid, and wait for the meal. But retorted rice was different. Before the electric cooker was popularized, steaming rice was actually a very troublesome thing. It also required a certain amount of experience and skill. Otherwise, if one was careless, the steamed rice would be half-cooked, or the steamed rice would be extremely hard with no moisture at all. Many people felt that retorted rice was hard, but in fact, this was because the steamed rice was not good enough. They didn't steam the rice with the right amount of softness and richness. Now, generally, only restaurants used retorts to cook rice. This was the first time the little fellow had eaten this kind of rice, so naturally, she felt that the rice was exceptionally fragrant. After lunch, the sister-in-law left with the Yida bottle that Qin Shi gave her. The toxicity of the heart-eating ant would attack every half an hour, and each attack lasted about 5 minutes. The Yida bottle contained the antidote, and one pill could suppress the toxicity for a day. The toxicity of this antidote was so strong that once it took effect, it could do nothing but lie on the ground and struggle. Wu Lian still counted on Sun Wen to do things, so Qin Shi naturally had to give him an antidote to suppress the toxicity. Letting Sun Wen earn the antidote through good performance was like giving a sweet date after a slap. This was the highest level of controlling people. Sun Wen's problem was solved, but the little fellow's problem was not. Although she was still smiling when eating, if she didn't find anything fun in the afternoon, she would probably curse at night. Qin Shi pondered for a moment, and after saying goodbye to Qin Ruoying, he took the little fellow to the river. It was still very cold in the valley at the beginning of spring. The little girl was wearing a thick down jacket and a cotton cap. She was wrapped up tightly, only revealing a small pink face. As soon as she arrived at the valley, she stepped on the big stones and skipped to the river. Then, she squatted on the stone and carefully reached out to touch the cold river water. She had never been to the river before, so of course, she was very excited. February was the best time to fish because the water temperature gradually rose at this time, and the fish would begin to move to the shallow water area on the shore. The temperature in the shallow water area rose faster under the sun, and a large number of shrimp, water insects, and plankton gathered there, which also provided a lot of food for the fish. Therefore, there would be groups of fish coming to the shallow water to warm themselves, forage for food, and even prepare for laying eggs in the future. When there were so many fish, it was naturally easy to fish. Fishing in the countryside was not so particular. A thin bamboo pole, a piece of fishing line, and a hook were enough. As for the bait, he just needed to go to the edge of the field and turn over a few stones. The little fellow was still young, so she didn't feel that the earthworms under the stones were disgusting. After she caught more than 10 earthworms and put them into the plastic bag. She followed her father and took one out of the soil under the stones, and then carefully studied it in her hand. She looked at her curious appearance and couldn't help but smile and pat her little head. After letting the little fellow put the earthworm into the bag, the father and daughter found a shallow water area on the river bank that faced the sun. The sun in early spring was very bright, and the warm sun shone on the body. The river breeze blew, making people feel refreshed. The little fellow sat on a big stone by the river. Before she started to fish, she was already happily waving the bamboo pole and giggling. After she put the fishing line on her bamboo pole and hung the earthworm, the little fellow followed her father's example and threw the hook into the river under the stone. As the saying goes, jiang taigong fishing, those who are willing to take the bait. The crucian carp in early spring was very easy to catch. In addition, she used his shinshi to drive the nearby fish over, so not long after the little fellow threw the bait, she felt a sudden pulling force on the fishing rod. Seeing this, the little fellow couldn't help but open her eyes wide. She pulled the fishing rod and was stunned for a moment. Then, she shouted excitedly, "Papa! Papa! I caught a fish! I caught a fish! Amazing! Nyan Nyan, quickly lift the fishing rod, or the fish will break free." Hearing Shi's words, the little fellow lifted the fishing rod and then threw it to the side. A crucian carp was immediately pulled out of the water by her and directly thrown into the sand on the river bank. Seeing that he had really caught a fish, the little guy was so excited that he immediately threw away the fishing rod and ran over to the fish. This crucian carp was not very big, about a jean. After being pulled ashore, it lay on the river bank and kept jumping. Chapter 224. Fishing was a very sentimental leisure activity. People who like to fish might not even like to eat fish. The so-called fishing was actually just to enjoy the process. Basking in the warm sun of early spring, sitting on a big stone in the valley, listening to the sound of running water, a broken pole could be sat on for a long time. The kind of immersion in the mountains and rivers, leisurely enjoying the natural quiet pleasure, once experienced once, was likely to be addictive. Anyone who likes fishing may have the same feeling. No matter if it's windy or raining, cold or freezing, no matter if it's hot or unbearable, they are not afraid of the storm or the muddy road. As long as they were free, they would spare no effort to find a good place. Even if they had to run dozens of miles, they would find a good place to fish quietly. Unfortunately, such a good place was not very easy to find now. These days, as long as there was abundant water, there would be a hydropower station. Hydropower stations promoted economic development and provided abundant electricity for the local area, but imperceptibly, it seriously affected the local ecological environment. Most of the rivers in the past had now become small streams. The branch of the Qingyi River in front of Qinshi was only 51 kilometers long, but there were as many as 17 small hydropower stations built on this river. On average, there was a small hydropower station every 3 kilometers of the river. The dam of the hydropower station blocked the river, so that the downstream water flow was sharply reduced. The survival environment of the aquatic creatures was extremely bad, so the population was sharply reduced. Rare animals like the giant salamander were already on the verge of extinction. As for the flood, this kind of situation was rarely seen anymore. The father and daughter sat on the stone for an afternoon. The little fellow seemed to like this activity very much. She swung the pole to fish, bit the line and lifted the pole. This set of actions was learned well. She did not bring a bucket, so he built a diving pool with small stones by the river. Any fish caught would be put into this pool by him. After an afternoon, there were no less than 20 fish in this pool. The little guy reached his hand into the water and constantly frightened the fish in the water. Seeing the fish quickly spinning around in the puddle but unable to swim out, the little guy was so happy that he started to giggle. This was her and her father's trophy. At 5:00 in the afternoon, she took the little fellow to count the number of fish. There were a total of 23 fish, but they were all small fish. Among them, the biggest one was actually the one that the little fellow had just fished up. It could be considered her good start. 23. Papa, we caught 23 fish. The little thing squatted beside the puddle and kept fiddling with the water. After she taught her how to count the fishes in the water one by one, 2, 3, 4, 5, the little fellow was so excited that she jumped up and down on the rock. Looking at her cute little face, she couldn't help but reach out and pinch it. It was smooth, delicate, and elastic. How was it? Was fishing fun? Fun. The little girl nodded her head vigorously. She was probably looking forward to her father bringing her here to play tomorrow. It's fine as long as it's fun, but the wind here is getting stronger and stronger. If we sit by the river for too long, we'll catch a cold, so we should go home. Daddy will bring you here to play tomorrow, okay? Hearing this, the little fellow tilted his head and pondered for a moment, then nodded and replied, N. Then let's bring the fish home. Seeing this, she rubbed her head and said with a smile, these fish are too small to be eaten. It's useless for us to take them home. Let's put them all away. When they grow up, we'll come back to fish again. How about it? No. After hearing Shi's words, the little thing was suddenly unhappy. She curled her lips and glanced at the small fish in the puddle, then muttered loudly, these are my fish. This little thing was still talking about her trophies. Therefore, she had no choice but to squat beside the little girl and talk to her about the big picture. Perhaps she was persuaded by Shi, the little fellow hesitated for a long time before reluctantly putting the biggest fish into the plastic bag. Then she reached into the water and dug a hole in the puddle. The fish noticed the movement of the water and immediately went out of the hole, successfully returning to the river. The little fellow looked down at the empty puddle in front of her and did not come back to her senses for a long time. When Shi saw her like this, he immediately put the plastic bag in front of her with a smile. Nyan, look, there's another one here. Mine. The little fellow snatched the plastic bag from Shi's hand. Looking at her posture, she was probably afraid that Shi would let the last one go. When the father and daughter returned to the old house, dinner had not yet started. The little fellow carried her trophies and ran into the kitchen, ready to show off in front of her grandmother and mother. Qin Ruoying was learning how to cook from Auntie Zhang. When the two of them saw the fish in her bag, they immediately laughed. A few words of praise had made this little thing's tail almost to the sky. There was still some time before dinner. She was afraid that the little fellow would not be able to sit still, so he called her to the yard. The little fellow was a little confused, but she did not explain to her. Instead, he took out a brazier from the old house and used a pair of tongs to pick up a few pieces of burning charcoal on the stove. Everything was ready. She called the little fellow and asked with a smile, Nyan, do you like to eat potatoes? Yes. I like to eat potatoes and pork ribs. Then wait a minute. Daddy will treat you to roast potatoes, okay? Roast potatoes? The little fellow blinked her eyes. When it came to eating, she immediately became excited. Then, She took 2 potatoes from the kitchen and threw them directly into the brazier without even washing them. Potatoes, corn, wheat, and rice were listed as the 4 main staple foods in the world. It could be cooked in a variety of ways, whether it was fried, stewed, or steamed. The most common way to eat potatoes was to fry them. As for eating them directly like Shi, it was very rare to see potatoes being eaten directly in the fire. It was not because roasted potatoes were not delicious, but because it was inconvenient to start a fire. He could not roast potatoes on the gas stove just to eat a roasted potato. This novel way of cooking successfully attracted the little fellow's interest. Therefore, she obediently squatted side by side with Shi under the eaves, guarding the brazier, and quietly waiting for the potatoes to be cooked. The potatoes were cooked quickly. She took the tongs and picked up the 2 potatoes that had been roasted to the point of being burnt. When the little fellow saw the dirty and shabby appearance of the potatoes, she immediately wrinkled her little nose in disgust. She rolled the potatoes on the ground to lower the temperature of the potatoes. When the temperature of the potatoes dropped slightly, he picked up a piece and tore off the burnt part of the potato bit by bit in front of the little fellow. The potatoes were burnt black, and the skin was very brittle. When he tore it off, a piece fell off. When the burnt skin was torn off by Shi, a crystal clear potato was hidden under the shabby surface. Light smoke rose from the already ripe potatoes, constantly emitting a refreshing fragrance. There was no need for salt or MSG. After roasting them, they could be eaten directly in the hand. With one bite, the soft and light taste could really melt a person's heart. In the quiet village, the distant mountains were like black, and the spring water was singing softly. A faint magnolia fragrance came with the breeze and lingered in the courtyard. The father and daughter each held a big potato and sat under the eaves of the old house to gnaw on it. Chapter 225. Since they came to the countryside, they naturally had to experience the unique market in the countryside. Going to the market was also called going to the market. The coastal area was called going to the void, the area in Dianzhou was called going to the street, and the area in Lingnan was called going to the business. The names were slightly different, but they all had the same meaning. Going to the market was also a unique product. The so-called going to the market meant that there was a fixed period of trade in remote places. When the time came, buyers and sellers would come from all over and gather at a certain place to buy and sell. There were not that many shopping malls and small stores in the countryside, so the government could only set a time. Then, everyone would gather at this time to exchange materials and buy biological products in the town. A place like Tongjiegu was not considered remote. It was adjacent to the 108 National Highway, but there was still only one small store. It could only sell small things like oil, salt, sauce, vinegar, snacks, and firecrackers. If the villagers wanted to buy clothes and farm tools, they either had to drive to the county or wait until the market. The town where Tongjiegu was located was called Siping Village. The market in Siping Village was on 3, 6, and 9. That meant that there would be a market on the 3rd, 13th, and 23rd of every month. There were a total of 9 times a month. It was not too many, but it was not too few either. If a driver often drove through the town, the most annoying situation was not to encounter livestock or children blocking the road, but to coincidentally encounter the market. Usually, there were not many people in the town, but on the day of the market, it would be particularly lively. There would be people coming and going. Not to mention driving, it would be difficult to squeeze through by walking, therefore, whenever it was time to go to the market, there would always be a traffic jam in the town for half a day. February 26th. It was only 8:30 in the morning, but the family of 7 was happily waiting on the side of the road. It was as if they were waiting for a taxi. They chatted while waiting for the passenger van from the various towns and counties to pass by. The passenger van was also a product of the era. Now, the slightly more developed areas had already banned the operation of the van. Therefore, the passenger van could only be seen in this kind of backward small county. This kind of van was also called the Chang'an car. Everyone felt that the Chang'an brand was the most practical, so it was called that. The Chang'an car was the most common minivan. It could carry 7 people. It was dyed green and yellow with a certificate in front of the window. It was considered an officially recognized operating vehicle. The biggest problem with the van was that it was overloaded. Because you never know how many people would come out of the van, it was normal for a 7-seater van to have 12 or 13 people in it. Chen Shi's family didn't want to squeeze in, so they spent 200 yuan to rent a van and enjoyed the special treatment of a car. Siping village was very lively now. When they were 1 or 2 kilometers away from the village, they could see countless villagers carrying bags of various sizes going back and forth on the 108 National Highway. The little fellow leaned on the sliding door and looked at the scenery outside the window with interest. Most of the villagers in the south lived in scattered places. They would only gather in the towns on the day of the market. The little fellow had lived in the countryside for a few days and was used to the sparse population in the countryside. She was not used to seeing so many people all of a sudden. Looking at the bustling atmosphere in the village, it was somewhat similar to a temple fair. There were a lot of people going to the market in the morning, so the driver had to stop 1 kilometer away from the village. If he went any further, he might not even be able to find a place to turn around. The driver was also a smart person. After Chen Shi's family got out of the car, he asked for Xia Pinglin's phone number and prepared to earn another sum of money later. Smartphones were widely available now. As soon as the family of 7 walked into the village, they saw a huge Oppo store and a Vivo store next door. The 2 brothers were really inseparable wherever they went. Outside the 2 smartphone stores, a blacksmith was selling farming tools such as plowing, raking, plowing, sickles, hoes, and so on that he had made himself. This was a miniature version of the countryside in Huaxia. The market was spread out along the streets of the town, from the beginning of the village to the end of the village. There were stalls on both sides of the road. It was lively, and there were shouts and bargaining everywhere. However, most of the things sold here were necessities or livestock, feed, farming tools, and other things that were closely related to the lives of farmers. The little girl sat in Chen Shi's arms. Standing high, she could see far, so she immediately saw a different sugar painting stall. Sugar painting was also a traditional craft among the people of Huaxia. It used brown sugar and white sugar to draw the 12 zodiac signs. You could spin it for 2 yuan. Whatever you spun, you could take it and make it on the spot. It was really delicious and fun. The little girl looked at it for a while and could not take her eyes off it. Therefore, she sat in Chen Shi's arms and twisted her small body as she shouted. Her luck was not bad. After 3 spins, she actually spun a dragon. The little thing was overjoyed on the spot and laughed at the top of her voice. Seeing the master make it on the spot and draw a dragon with his bare hands, the little thing's eyes were about to pop out. When the master was done with the sugar painting, she held the dragon in one hand and the rat in the other. The remaining dog was fed to Chen Shi. Aunt Zhang watched with a smile on her face. Ever since the little thing was accompanied by her parents, even the smile on her face was more than before. Just as the family surrounded the sugar painting stall and praised the sugar painting master's skills with laughter, there was suddenly a commotion on the other side of the road. Looking at the sound of gongs, drums, and firecrackers, it seemed that someone was picking up the bride. When the little girl heard the commotion, she immediately shouted for Chen Shi to pick her up to take a look. Sure enough, as the sound of gongs and drums got closer, a wedding procession appeared in the little girl's line of sight. The wedding procession's formation was impressive. In front, there were gongs and drums to clear the way, followed by a palanquin with 8 carriers. Along the way, the villagers all retreated to the sides of the road to make enough aisle for the wedding procession. The wedding procession forcibly crossed the entire Siping village just like that. Looking at the formation, it seemed a little too ostentatious. In fact, what the villagers really avoided was not the palanquin and the folk band, but the dozens of young people following behind the palanquin. These young people carried a few large loudspeakers and sang Zhang Yu's "For You" loudly as they walked. It must be a special fate that allowed us to become a family along the way. The more you love her, the more she will return the favor. Find the possibility of happiness, their voices were very loud, and in the end, they directly suppressed the bustle of the market, so much so that the transactions on the entire street temporarily stopped. Only the singing of "For You" could be heard, as if they were singing the national anthem. The villagers all moved to the sides of the street and silently watched them pass by. The little girl had never seen such a formation before. She immediately sat in Chen Shi's arms and exclaimed, "Wow!" Chapter 226. Gongs and drums cleared the way, and firecrackers sounded. Behind the 8 sedan chairs, there were dozens of people singing, "For You." Marriage was always a joyous occasion, but the attitude of this group of troublesome youngsters was not very good. They clearly chose to get married on the day of the market, which affected the normal trade of the villagers, but as long as these young people saw someone blocking the sedan chair, they would immediately rush over and yell at the other person to get out of the way. It seemed that in their dictionary, there was no such thing as communication and discussion. An old man probably had bad hearing, but he still stood on the side of the road with a backpack on his back, thinking about what he should buy back. When the young people saw this, they immediately went forward and dragged the old man to the side. It had to be said that these young people were indeed young people. Fortunately, they met an easygoing old man today. Otherwise, if the old man directly fell to the ground, they would not be able to afford it even if they sold them by the weight. As the wedding procession continued to go deeper, more and more people came to the market. In the end, the sedan chair and the folk band could no longer maintain the original speed. Seeing this, the group of young people carried the sound system to the front, and then let them open the way. Like the heavy cavalry of the Middle Ages, the young people carried the sound system, with the momentum of a fierce tiger coming down the mountain, and forcibly tore open a passage in the lively market. "Get out of the way, we brothers are getting married, don't block the way." Brothers, Chuanyu dialect, means big brother. Get out of the way, get out of the way. Ha ha ha, if you don't get out of the way, do you believe that I won't smash your stall? Get out of the way. Their aggressive posture was quite a bit of the temperament of a local hooligan and street gangster. Those who did not know would think that this street was built by them. Seeing this group of tyrannical young people like the god of plague, the villagers in the market all retreated to the sides of the street, making a spacious passage for them. For a moment, the market that was very lively just now was now only the sound of the sound system and gongs and drums that were still echoing. Seeing this, Chen Shi and his family also retreated to the side of the road and quietly waited for the wedding procession to come from the town. The little fellow did not find the atmosphere strange because she was very interested in the palanquin. Thus, she stretched her neck like a giraffe and stared at the palanquin. This group of young people probably thought that they were soldiers. Escorting the bride was like winning a battle. When they saw that no one dared to stand in front of the group, they proudly sang, "For You." In fact, most of these young people were locals. Among the commoners who came to the market, there might be their relatives and elders. However, these youngsters had always lacked discipline. They were used to being unbridled and had no respect for their elders. When they were angered, they could even beat their parents. Naturally, no one dared to stand out and say a few words to them. After all, the children in the countryside lost at the starting line. While the parents of the children in the city were considering which school to choose for their children and which specialty classes to attend, the children in the countryside were still catching grasshoppers in the vast wheat fields, digging for eels, and going to the mountains to catch birds and steal melons. Most of the people in the countryside did not have much education. Junior high school education was already very good. Although the 9-year compulsory education had been popularized, many parents in the countryside still did not have a full understanding of the importance of education. If the child did not want to study, they would find a way for the child. And the so-called way was actually not a good way. Those with better conditions could go to the army, and those with worse conditions could go out to work, either in construction sites, restaurants, hair salons, or car repair shops. In short, wherever people were needed, they would be there. The salary was not high. It was enough to get enough food and clothing in the big city. Of course, there were also many children in the countryside who made a name for themselves. If they were smart, diligent, and sensible, they might find their own way after 3 to 5 years and start their own business. In the end, they might even be more successful than many highly educated people in the city. But such people were always in the minority. Gold would always shine, but the most common thing in the gold beach was still the inconspicuous gravel. Those who could go out to work were already very diligent and sensible. There were also some rural children who, because of the lack of discipline, were lazy all day long. In the end, they became slackers who did nothing all day long, just like the group of young people in front of them. They were the so-called ruffians in the countryside. There was no lack of ruffians anywhere, even in remote places. In the past, the ruffians in the countryside did not see much of the world, so most of them only knew how to make a fuss. It was not until Young and Dangerous was released that they were truly taught how to be a proper ruffian. The Young and Dangerous series of movies had a far greater impact on rural children than ordinary people could imagine. Even if the series had been released for more than 10 or 20 years, it still distorted the values of many young people. At its peak, the 3 words, Chenhaonan, were second only to QQ. It also made chasing girls, one-on-one, and slashing people the 3 most popular things among young people. Unruly people came from barren lands. A few years ago, other than the popularity of Young and Dangerous, there was also a coal mining boom. Many coal bosses came from the surrounding villages. The coal bosses were rich and powerful, so they quickly recruited them and turned them into their own thugs. Therefore, these young people followed behind their so-called brothers all day long to make a living. When the brothers were free, they would give them some money for cigarettes and they would give their lives to others. This was the loyalty they learned from the movies. Today was the big day when the brothers were getting married. As brothers, of course, they would come to help the brothers. Tie up, in Sichuan and Chongqing dialect, meant to support the wedding. Dozens of hooligans were aggressively walking on the street. How could the honest villagers dare to bear the brunt of the attack? In desperation, everyone had to stop trading and obediently retreat to the sides of the street. Then, they anxiously hoped that this group of plague gods would leave quickly. It was obviously a joyous occasion, but now it was like they were sending off the plague gods. However, the young people did not feel the slightest bit of awareness. Instead, they were extremely proud. The few who walked at the front were like straight crabs with their heads held high. They were just short of using their nostrils to look at the road. The wedding procession was very fast. It did not take long for them to cross the entire Siping village and then walk past Chen Shi's family. The little girl looked at the palanquin that was getting closer and closer. She could not help but mutter with anticipation, "Papa, I also want to sit in the palanquin." Hearing this, Chen Shi pinched her little face and asked with a smile, "Well, in the future, you will sit in the palanquin. Papa will carry the palanquin for you, okay?" "Okay. Papa will carry the palanquin in front. Mama will carry the palanquin in the back. I will sit inside." After hearing Chen Shi's words, the little girl immediately pointed at the palanquin bearers and giggled. This little thing has even arranged the mission. However, just as the father and daughter were laughing and chatting, a few young people in the wedding procession turned to look at them. They first glanced at the little girl, then looked at Chen Shi. Finally, their eyes fell on Qin Ruoying. It had to be said that Chen Shi's family's appearance was really outstanding. Their style was completely different from the local people, especially in such a small and remote place like this. Women of Qin Ruoying's level were as rare as pandas. It was estimated that these young people would not see such a beautiful woman in their lifetime. Therefore, just like the chairman's military parade, all the young people who passed by Chen Shi's family could not help but look at Qin Ruoying a few more times. That figure, that face, that temperament, it was really amazing. Then, one of the young people could not help but whistle at Qin Ruoying. Chapter 227. The behavior of whistling was first recorded in the Book of Songs. But at that time, whistling was a pure art. It was something that the upper class would play with. But today, the behavior of whistling was given a new meaning by people. Especially when a man whistled at a woman, this behavior was completely frivolous and obscene. There was even a special word for this behavior in English called catcalling. Pinyin reading, look at the special expansion ling. Cat refers to a cat, and calling refers to shouting, calling. Catcalling meant that when a man saw a strange woman in a public place, he would whistle at the woman or shout words like, "Your breasts are so big, your butt is so perky," to attract the woman's attention. Whistling at beautiful women, this behavior not only appeared in Xia, but also in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, India, and other countries. It could be said that it was a common hobby of men all over the world. However, when a man whistled at a woman and praised a woman's body or appearance, he didn't really want to date the woman. He just wanted to have the right to dominate her. Catcalling, that is, a man declaring sovereignty over a woman's body. It was to constantly remind a woman that satisfying a man's desire was the first priority as a woman. This was actually a form of gender discrimination and also a disguised form of sexual harassment. Therefore, since January 1, 2018, the Netherlands began to punish catcalling. If someone whistled at the opposite sex to harass someone, once caught, they could be fined up to €200. She was a strange person. As long as his bottom line was not crossed, then he was a very easy to get along with a good family man. It could be said that he was a good cook. When he was in a good mood, she could even chat with the aunties selling vegetables on the street for a whole day. After all, he was a qualified house husband. There were not many things in this world that were worthy of his attention. What he cared about was every family member around him. Especially Nian and Ying. Now, there was actually someone who dared to whistle at Qin Ruoying with a frivolous smile and an undisguised lecherous gaze right in front of him. This was completely flirting with a man's wife in front of him. If she could even endure this, then why would he cultivate as a hammer immortal? He could just find a sewer that extended in all directions and hide in it as a ninja turtle. Therefore, the moment the whistle sounded, she had already disappeared with the little fellow in his arms. His movements were very fast. Before the little fellow in his arms could react, she had already appeared in front of the young man. Then, he raised his right hand and slapped the young man's face. Slap. This slap was so powerful that it sent the young man spinning like a top on the spot. After spinning a few times, he fell heavily to the ground. The turn of events was too sudden, so much so that the people around were stunned for a while before they finally regained their senses. They hurriedly squatted beside the young man and used a lot of effort to pull him up from the ground. "Spring Baby? Is there no problem?" The young man who was known as Spring Baby had suffered a heavy slap in the face. Although she had already shown mercy, he still made his head faint for a short while. After lying on the ground to recover for a while, he finally covered his head and stood up with the help of his companions. Spring Baby looked to be in his early 20s. He was not tall and was almost half a head shorter than Shi. He looked thin and thin. In Chuanyu dialect, he was as thin as a chicken. However, although this chicken's physical fitness was not very good, his temper was very irritable. After he stood up shakily, a trace of viciousness flashed across Spring Baby's face. Then, he roared at Shi and said, "F***CKU. B****. How dare you hit me?" After saying that, Spring Baby carried an aura like a ferocious beast that had been released from its cage. He glared and clenched his fists, charging directly toward Shi. The young man was arrogant and thought that he could defeat anyone with a fierce force. But to be honest, with their bodies that had long been exhausted by cigarettes and alcohol, not to mention that the person standing opposite was Shi, even a middle-aged uncle who had been farming all year round on the street could probably defeat him with one hand. Therefore, when Spring Baby rushed toward Shi, he was instantly kicked back by Shi. Spring Baby was also lucky because today's occasion was different. Aunt Zhang and the little girl were watching from the side, so Shi was very gentle. With one kick, other than sending Spring Baby flying, Shi did not break several of Zhao Yuan's ribs like the last time he kicked Zhao Yuan. Shi showed mercy, but Spring Baby did not have the slightest awareness in this regard. After being supported by his companions behind him, he spat on the ground fiercely and then took out a butterfly knife from his trouser pocket. As the saying goes, the unreasonable are afraid of the reckless, and the reckless are afraid of the reckless. This kind of hooligan in his early 20s happened to be in the final stage of his Chinibu syndrome. For young people like them who had wine today, they would drink today and worry about tomorrow. The two words fear and regret never existed in their dictionaries. As long as their temper flared up, they could really do anything. Perhaps when they calmed down afterward, they would also feel afraid, but at the moment of the incident, there was definitely only one word in their minds: just do it. Moreover, this was his territory, and there were dozens of brothers standing behind him. If he admitted defeat now, how could he survive in the underworld in the future? Since he could not win with his fists and feet, Spring Baby naturally had to show his knife. Get out of the way. I'm going to kill him today. No one stopped him, and a few of his quick-witted companions even quietly took a few steps to the side. All of this happened very suddenly. When Aunt Zhang finally came back to her senses and wanted to stop it, Spring Baby had already taken the butterfly knife and slashed towards Chen Shi. Chen Shi did not want the little girl to see the cruel side of the adult world, so he used his left hand to support the little girl's butt, while his right hand gently pressed the back of the little girl's head, making her obediently lie on his shoulder and not turn her head. The little girl blinked her eyes, somewhat unable to understand what was going on with her father. However, she was very obedient. After hearing Chen Shi's instructions, she wrapped her arms around Chen Shi's neck, and then obediently rested her chin on Chen Shi's shoulder. Then, the little girl heard a strange sound. First, there was a crisp "ka" sound, then the clang-clang sound of a knife falling to the ground, and finally Spring Baby's earth-shattering scream. Chapter 228. If there's wine today, let's drink in the morning. If there's worry tomorrow, let's worry tomorrow. Other than being poor, a hooligan like Chun Hua had never encountered any setbacks. No one dared to scold him at home. Outside, they were all his brothers, so naturally, no one dared to provoke him. This was not the first time Chun Hua had flashed her knife in a fight. In the past, as long as he flashed his knife, even opponents with the physique of fitness trainers would be frightened by Spring Baby. Then, they could only hold their heads and take a beating from him. After all, Hua Xia's laws were indeed a little strange. There was a fine line between normal self-defense and excessive self-defense. No one knew how it would be judged except for the judge. For a scum like Chun Hua, who only cared about his life, if he injured someone, he would at most go to the police station for 3 to 5 years. Anyway, he would be a bachelor, and when he came out, he would be a hero again. Moreover, because they had slashed people and gone to jail, they would become even more famous in the pugilistic world. Their social status would also rise exponentially. If he was lucky, he might be noticed by a leader and supported by him. Maybe he would immediately become a big boss who subcontracted a project. Speaking of which, this was a good thing. However, if someone hit him too hard and accidentally hurt him, in addition to having to pay compensation, he might have to go to the police station and leave a stain on his record, which would affect his future career. A normal person would never do something like this, where the loss outweighed the gain in a moment of anger. That was why the ancestor often said, "Bear with it for a while and calm the waves. Take a step back and you'll see the world." That was probably what he meant. Chun Hua was used to being tyrannical. Although his physical fitness was not good, he was ruthless and would pull out a knife at the slightest provocation. Therefore, he was somewhat famous in Xing County. Generally, no one dared to provoke him. Unfortunately, Chun Hua met Chen Shi today. Therefore, when he took out his knife and slashed at Chen Shi aggressively, Chen Shi immediately grabbed his wrist with one hand, then pulled, twisted, and pushed him. Chun Hua's right arm was dislocated by Chen Shi on the spot. A dislocated shoulder joint was actually quite scary. It looked as if a large piece of the shoulder was suddenly missing. The entire arm seemed to have no bones, and it was only hanging on the shoulder by the pull of the muscles. Ah! Spring Child looked at his empty shoulder and was immediately frightened. He clutched his arm and let out a squeal like a pig being slaughtered on the spot. This group of hooligans didn't even read many books. Of course, they didn't know how to deal with a dislocated arm. They thought that Chunwa's arm had been broken by Chenxi. A few of the more upright brothers saw this and immediately let out a roar, F***CKU. Attack together. Hack him to death. The street was in chaos, and the bridal procession had already stopped. Dozens of young people blocked Chenxi's family in front of the sugar painting stall. The sugar painter was so scared that he had already run into a shop on the street. 7 or 8 youngsters surrounded Chenxi, making a ruckus. Just now, they thought that Chunwa could handle it, so they didn't make a move. Now that they saw Chunwa being defeated, they naturally wouldn't stand by and watch. Seeing this, Chenxi gently squeezed Qin Ruoying's palm and then took a few steps forward. Qin Ruoying naturally knew what Chenxi meant. However, after thinking for a moment, she did not say anything. Instead, she came to Aunt Zhang's side and comforted her in a low voice. Aunt Zhang was already frightened by the scene in front of her. This was the first time she saw Chenxi fight with someone. Moreover, the people in front of her were not good people, so Aunt Zhang immediately shouted at Xia Pinglin nervously, "Pinglin! Call the police quickly." After saying that, she turned her head and shouted at Chenxi, "Chenxi, what are you doing? Come here quickly, we'll wait for the police to come." As she said that, Aunt Zhang wanted to pull Chenxi back. However, she had just taken a step when she was stopped by Qin Ruoying in time. Looking at the agitated look on her grandmother's face, the little girl lying on Chenxi's shoulder was really confused about the situation. When Chunwa screamed earlier, Chenxi used his vital essence to block her ears in time, so she did not hear the movements around her at all. The little girl wanted to turn around to take a look, but Chenxi gently pressed the back of her head, not letting her turn her head. Therefore, the little girl immediately pouted unhappily. She twisted her small body and shouted in dissatisfaction, "Put me down. I want to go to mommy." The scene was chaotic. Chenxi's face was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. There were at least 1,000 people on this street for the market today. Moreover, Nian and Aunt Zhang were also watching by the side, so he had been merciful. If the tiger did not show its might, these bastards would really think that he was a sick cat. Just as Chenxi was about to fly into a rage, a roar suddenly came from the loudspeaker. "CNM. Today is Lousy's wedding, you bastards want claws?" The volume of the loudspeaker was already very loud, so when the roar came out, the entire street immediately became silent. When the youths heard this voice, they were immediately stunned on the spot. After looking at each other, they decisively turned around and returned to the crowd. Then, a man who looked to be about 30 or 40 years old walked out of the palanquin. When he pulled up the curtain, he could vaguely see that there was a woman in a wedding robe in the palanquin, tidying up her clothes. The man adjusted his belt as he strode in the direction of Chunwa. When he saw Chunwa's dislocated arm, the man did not even say a word of concern and directly kicked her. Then, he shouted at the person next to Chunwa, "Why are you standing here with your claws? Hurry up and take her to the hospital." Chunwa was in so much pain that she was drenched in cold sweat. After being kicked, she pursed her lips and did not even dare to make a sound. She lowered her head and walked toward the village clinic with the help of her companions. After Chunwa left, the man turned around and came in front of Chenxi's family. This person was estimated to be less than 40 years old, but he had a domineering aura. When he stood there, he naturally gave off a feeling of power without being angry. Ever since he appeared, the streets had become completely silent. It could be seen that this person's aura was so strong that it was not something that ordinary people could reach. Compared to him, Chenxi seemed a little too ordinary. When the man came in front of Chenxi's family, the young people behind him immediately surrounded Chenxi's family in an umbrella shape. Looking at their posture, it seemed that as long as the old man gave the order, they would immediately rush up and beat Chenxi up. The young people showed an eager look, but after the man took a deep look at Chenxi, he turned around and returned to the palanquin. Motherf***, the guests are about to arrive, and you guys are still here causing trouble for me. Hurry up and leave." The man ordered, and the bridal escort team set off again. With their departure, the market also returned to its previous bustle. It was as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, Aunt Zhang couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Then she came to Chen Shi's side and began to blame him for being insensible. He actually fought with people on the street. Just when Aunt Zhang was complaining, the owner of the sugar painting stall said to them carefully, "Are you from out of town? Let me give you a piece of advice. Don't waste any more time here. Hurry back. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Digression. The prototype of this story is a relative of mine. He didn't even graduate from primary school. In 2010, he was a scum of society who couldn't even pay back 8,000 yuan. He went to prison for 3 years, but he was chosen by the boss of the construction bureau. In 3 years, he turned from negative assets to a millionaire. When he was building the Yashi Expressway, he rented a sand mine. Now, he is a big boss with tens of millions of assets. Why? He is a village boy with no background. The big boss is not related to him. Why did he choose him? If you don't know something, it can only mean that you are not experienced enough, so don't come out to show ignorance, okay? Also, the countryside I wrote is different from the countryside, you know. Then I want to ask, the country is divided into north and south, mountainous and coastal areas, 23 provinces, 2 special administrative regions, 5 autonomous regions, 4 municipalities directly under the central government, 282 prefecture-level cities, 374 county-level cities, and countless towns, streets, and communities. How many have you been to? Can you represent the country? Chapter 229. On the bustling Siping Street, a strange atmosphere faintly pervaded the air. The fight just now did not last long, but it caused quite a stir. The wedding procession had already left, but the surrounding villagers were still pointing at Chen Shi's family and gossiping. The sugar painting stall's boss was an honest person. Seeing that they were outsiders who did not understand the situation, he cautiously advised them to leave quickly and not stay here any longer. Aunt Zhang was already so old, but she could not withstand such a scare, so she frowned on the spot. The sugar painting stall's boss's serious expression did not seem like he was joking with them. This also made Aunt Zhang realize the seriousness of the problem, so after thinking for a while, she called everyone to prepare to go home. However, when the little fellow heard that Aunt Zhang wanted to go home, she immediately pulled Qin Ruoying's hand, raised her little head and shouted loudly, "I haven't played here yet. I'll go home after playing." Seeing this, Chen Shi could only helplessly shake his head, then squatted down and used a negotiating tone to say to the little fellow, "Nian Nian, you see, there's nothing fun here, let's go back. Daddy will bring you up the mountain to catch some birds later, okay?" Hearing this, the little fellow pouted her little mouth and muttered in dissatisfaction, "No. It's fun here. Let's play here." As she said that, she wanted to break free from Qin Ruoying's hand and was prepared to walk on the streets by herself, but she was stopped by Qin Ruoying in time. This little fellow liked to be lively. When she went to the market, people came and went, and there were many stalls and shops. Now that she was here, she did not even finish walking around the street, so of course she would be unhappy. Children love to play, so naturally, she did not know what her grandmother was worried about. The husband and wife looked at each other, their expressions somewhat helpless. After all, Aunt Zhang was just an ordinary person. After seeing that they had a conflict with the hooligans, she naturally wanted to avoid them. In order to not let Aunt Zhang worry, the husband and wife could only let the little fellow suffer. Therefore, Chen Shi ignored the little one's wishes and carried her in the direction they came from. The little girl was stunned for a moment. Then, she realized that her father was going to take her away by force. So, she leaned on Chen Shi's shoulder and twisted her body with all her strength. Then, she shouted for Chen Shi to put her down. The little fellow howled and twisted for a while, but Chen Shi turned a deaf ear to it. Seeing this, she could only pout her mouth and burst into tears. Looking at her tear-stained face, it would take a long time to appease her this time. Chen Shi and his family left. While they were leaving, in Si Ping Hospital, Chen Wawa was trembling all over as he waited for the doctor to treat him. After a dislocated shoulder occurred, the muscles around the shoulder joint would be in a state of shock for a short period of time, so it would not be very painful when it happened. But once the shock period passed, the muscles around the arm would be in a state of spasm, causing the pain to worsen and making it very difficult to reset. Chen Wawa had now passed the shock period, and that kind of piercing pain was really unbearable for him. The doctor had just touched his arm, and Chen Wawa was already in so much pain that he cried out. Villagers often suffered dislocations when they were doing heavy work, so the doctors in the town hospital were very good at treating dislocations. The doctor first pretended to massage Chen Wawa's arm as if nothing had happened. Then, while he was crying out, the doctor suddenly grabbed his arm and twisted it skillfully. After a crisp click, the doctor reconnected Chen Wawa's arm. Although the shoulder joint was reset, the sudden sharp pain made Chen Wawa roll his eyes. It was so painful that he didn't even have the strength to cry out. "Okay, you rest first. I'll give you a splint later. Don't move around for half a month. Otherwise, it is very likely to cause ossifying myositis, and it will become a habitual dislocation in the future." After the doctor gave a few instructions, Chen Hua lay on the chair and moaned weakly. At this moment, a young man suddenly rushed in from outside the door and shouted at Chen Hua, "Third brother, that kid is running away. What should we do?" Hearing this, Spring Child suddenly jumped up from the chair with strength that came from nowhere. Then, he straightened his neck and roared angrily, "Run my ass. Chase." If he couldn't catch up, he would record the license plate number. "I will definitely hack him to death." After that, he clutched his shoulder and cried out in pain. Because of this sudden interlude, Chen Shi and his family could only return resentfully. The little girl cried for a long time before she finally stopped crying under Auntie Zhang's comfort. Then, she pressed her little face against the window and sulked. No matter who spoke to her, she didn't want to respond. While Lil Thing was sulking, Chen Shi was also very depressed. He didn't expect that his wife would be taken advantage of when he went out shopping. He even scared Auntie Zhang and made the child cry. Everything was going wrong. These bastards thought of him as Gao Yanai, but he wasn't Lin Chong. If Auntie Zhang wasn't beside him today, he would have seen what these bastards would dare to do. The atmosphere in the car was very gloomy. No one spoke. Auntie Zhang still felt that Chen Shi's way of handling things today was wrong. Those hooligans only whistled at Qin Ruoying, but Chen Shi's reaction was so intense. He went up and slapped them. Of course, they had to fight. So after thinking for a while, Auntie Zhang couldn't help but scold Chen Shi. Hearing this, Chen Shi could only nod with a bitter face, but he didn't think so at all. Just now, he was standing by the side, but these bastards still whistled at Qin Ruoying. What if he wasn't there at that time? What if these scumbags were drinking at that time, or saw such a beautiful woman in a remote place? Could it be that they had to swallow their teeth after being taken advantage of? Why? Although it was a small matter, it involved a matter of principle, so Chen Shi couldn't bear it at all. Auntie Zhang wasn't a naggy person. After saying a few more words, she sighed deeply and put this matter aside for the time being. Then, she asked the van driver about the situation. The van driver went back and forth between various towns all year round, so he was naturally clear about the surrounding matters. When he heard about the wedding procession made up of dozens of young people, he immediately smiled and said, "Haven't you heard of the name Li Diaming? He loves to do these kinds of things. Today is his wedding, so he must make it more lively." Li Diaming, the man who came out of the palanquin, was the village tyrant in this area, according to the current popular vocabulary. His father was the former high-ranking official of the Siping village party, but he had retired now. Although the village was poor, village bullies were not to be underestimated. A qualified village bully's wealth was no less than the boss of some large enterprises. There were many kinds of village bullies. Because of the country's punishment, the village bullies basically wouldn't use violence to run rampant in the village and prey on the people. They would use other places instead. For example, the village bully who openly embezzled the country's subsidies during the Wenchuan earthquake. This kind of person was the most retarded and deserved to be shot. Those who were slightly smarter would use the method of using agents to contract the forest and mineral resources in the village at a low price. The contract period would be 60 to 70 years, and it would be passed down from generation to generation. More advanced ones, such as the villages near the city, would even involve demolition. Many village bullies were the bosses of real estate companies, and the so-called employees were actually their hired thugs. Li Diaming belonged to the most intelligent type of village bully. Chapter 230. Li Diaming was not a bad person, at least much better than his father. These words were said by the people in the surrounding villages. Although Li Diaming's mouth was full of vulgarities, he was not reckless at all when he did things. Instead, he was very shrewd. His father, Li Imin, was the previous generation's village tyrant. All day long, he was thinking about how to exploit the villagers and squeeze the people's wealth. His table manners were also very ugly, so the villagers were full of complaints and suffered unspeakably. Li Diaming grew up in Siping. He used to be a gangster that everyone disliked. But ever since he graduated from high school and was sent to the army, Li Diaming seemed to have changed into a different person. First, he contracted a gravel yard with his father's help. Then, he started to dabble in forestry, coal mining, and other businesses. Li Diaming had an advantage, which was that he was not like a Pishio that only entered and did not leave. There was a surplus of labor in the rural areas, and many farmers who could not find a job had become idlers. Therefore, Li Diaming gathered all of these people together. He either led them to start businesses and become rich, or he simply let them work for him. Even if they did not do anything, Li Diaming would still pay them on time and not deduct a single cent. Since everyone had accepted Li Diaming's kindness, they naturally wouldn't speak ill of the Li family anymore. After all, a big business like a mine was not something that ordinary people could come into contact with. They did not understand the twists and turns of it. Anyway, as long as the Li family did not monopolize the profits, everyone's opinions would not be so big. At most, they would be jealous, but they would not complain all day long like before. Li Diaming was doing well in the surrounding villages, and he never hid the fact that he was rich. This was because the first Lamborghini in Rain City was his. Now that the internet was so developed, everyone knew about Lamborghini, but not many people knew the specific model. In fact, the cheapest Lamborghini Hurricane cost more than 3 million, and Li Diaming's Aventador cost more than 8 million. The roads in the countryside were very bad, and this luxury car that cost nearly 10 million could only be parked in the county as a decoration. In the words of the people, it was a table, a symbol of status. Li Diaming was very ostentatious, but he would stay in Siping for at least 300 days a year. No matter how rich he was now, he would never separate himself from the masses. He had truly achieved the goal of coming from the grassroots and going back to the grassroots. Why were there so many young people in the bridal procession joining in the fun? Wasn't it because everyone knew that following Li Diaming would be beneficial? Times have changed. Even the hooligans have become cultured. Naturally, the village tyrants have to adapt to the times so that they won't be eliminated. They have to hide in this good place with green mountains and clear waters to reproduce and survive. After listening to the driver's introduction, Aunt Zhang immediately had the most direct understanding of Li Diaming's social status. Therefore, the moment she returned to Tongjiago, she discussed with Qin Shi that they would return to Chengdu the next morning. Anyway, she didn't have any relatives here. At worst, she wouldn't come back in the future. These hooligans couldn't be beaten or scolded. Once they stuck to her, she couldn't get rid of them. Naturally, Aunt Zhang didn't want to be too entangled with them. Seeing this, Qin Shi couldn't say anything more and could only nod his head continuously. This trip was really depressing. On the other side, after the little fellow returned to the old house, she climbed onto the bed alone and sulked. Qin Shi wanted to coax her, but the little fellow angrily pushed him away. Children of 4 or 5 years old already had a clear self-awareness. Qinshi's behavior today really angered her, so the little fellow was so angry at her father for the first time. His daughter was angry, so he naturally had to coax her. Therefore, Qinshi went outside to catch a sparrow and quietly put it on the little fellow's pillow. This sparrow was bound by Qinshi's, so it could only jump around on the pillow and constantly chirp. The little fellow was lying on the bed and panting. When she heard the sound of the sparrow close by, she couldn't help but raise her head from the quilt and then couldn't move her eyes anymore. After all, birds were a great attraction to children. The little fellow sat up at once and carefully stretched out her hands. After finding that the bird couldn't fly, she decisively reached out and held the bird in her hands. "Papa! I caught it! Look! Bird!" After the little fellow caught the sparrow, she immediately laughed proudly. Seeing that Qinshi was still next to her, she even held up the sparrow to show off to Qinshi. As for the previous unhappiness, obviously, she had completely forgotten about it. The sparrow tactic worked. Qinshi immediately went over and praised Nyanyan for being so amazing. The little fellow really thought that the sparrow was caught by her, so she was also very happy. The father and daughter gathered together to study this pitiful little sparrow. After a while, they were reconciled as before. Thus, they discussed catching another sparrow to make a pair and bring it back to Shangjing to raise it properly. Just as the father and daughter were sticking together to show their love, 3 vans suddenly stopped at the entrance of the village. Then, many young people came out of the car. As the saying goes, it's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge, but a villain takes revenge from morning to night. Chunhua was obviously a standard villain. He was still wearing a plaster cast, but he couldn't wait to bring his brothers to take revenge. Although Li Diaming didn't say anything in the morning, it didn't mean that he would pretend that this didn't happen. If he didn't even fart when his subordinate's arm was broken, how could he stay in this village in the future? Therefore, when Chunhua proposed revenge, Li Diaming only said one sentence: "Don't kill anyone." The implication was that as long as he didn't kill anyone, it wouldn't be a problem to injure or cripple them. Chunhua brought more than 30 people this time. They were all Li Diaming's subordinates. They were also the elite backbone when they fought with the mine boss at Cheongshui. These people were aggressive. As soon as they got out of the car, they swarmed toward Aunt Zhang's old house. Just as the villagers of Tong Family Ravine poked their heads out and wanted to see the situation, they were viciously pointed back at by Chunhua with a knife. "What are you looking at? Get lost. The director of Siping Police Station is my second uncle. If anyone dares to call the police, I'll hack them to death later." Seeing this, the villagers immediately retracted their heads and hid behind the door, not daring to show their heads again. Just as Chunhua and his group walked toward the old house aggressively, Qinshi, who was accompanying the little guy in the room, also frowned deeply. To be honest, Qinshi also felt that he was very degrading to have a conflict with these local ruffians. But there was no other way. Since things had already come to this, he could only cut the Gordian knot and not let Aunt Zhang worry anymore. Therefore, Qinshi took out his mobile phone and called his sister-in-law, then walked out of the old house. After casually setting up a soundproof restriction to surround the old house, he stood alone on the path leading to the valley and quietly looked at the group of sloppy young people in front of him. Seeing them in groups of 3 to 5, holding daggers and clubs with fierce expressions, Qinshi couldn't help but feel emotional. Chapter 231. Police officers and civil servants at the grassroots level were actually very tired. Take Siping Village for example. It had a total area of more than 100 square kilometers, a permanent population of 5,000 people, and a total of 1,600 households. There were only 12 police officers and auxiliary police officers in the village police station. These 12 people were responsible for more than 100 square kilometers of territory. Every day, in addition to maintaining law and order in the area, they also had to handle daily business. They had to run more than 10 kilometers for a trivial matter. The grassroots police force was seriously insufficient, so there was a new organization, the Public Security Alliance Defense Team. In modern terms, it was the support staff. When the Siping Public Security Alliance Defense Team was officially established, the leaders of the County Public Security Bureau, township secretaries, village secretaries, villagers' representatives, and enterprise representatives all attended. 70 to 80 people attended the defense team's signing ceremony, but there were only 10 people in the defense team. They were mainly composed of young people who did not go out to work. Young people who did not go out to work sounded good, but in fact, it referred to young people like Chunwa who were idle all day and unwilling to go out to work. Now, more than half of the members of the defense team stood in front of Chinshi. Because this was a private matter, no one wore uniforms, but they still took out the batons issued by the police station. This thing was easy to use. It was of military quality. Because the first section was thinner, the pressure generated under the same pressure would be higher. In addition, the baton itself was made of steel, so its lethality was much higher than ordinary batons. Basically, one hit from the baton could split a person's skin and flesh. For specific details, you can refer to Kill Break Wolf 1, Zhenziden vs. Wu Jing. The villagers needed the defense team to intervene when they fought, but what if the defense team wanted to fight? Then, only the police station could intervene. However, Chunwa had already called the police station before they set off, and the director gave them 5 minutes. In other words, the Siping police station would only send police 5 minutes after receiving the call. It would take about 7 or 8 minutes to run from Siping to Tongjia Ditch. In addition, the villagers could not call the police immediately, so Chunwa had about 15 minutes to do something. For 15 minutes, there was no one to respond to his cries for help. Chunwa had a plaster cast in his right hand and a machete in his left hand. Like a leader, he led more than 30 people in large strides toward Aunt Zhang's old house. As the saying went, a strong dragon could not suppress a snake in its old haunts. This was because in 1999, such a vicious incident had happened in Chu County. A major and battalion commander of the troops stationed at the port was accompanying his pregnant wife back to her hometown, Xuxian, to recuperate. Unexpectedly, they got into a quarrel at the train station and ended up fighting. That person wasn't a match for the battalion commander. After the battalion commander let him go, he called over 30 people to come back for revenge and severely injured the battalion commander on the spot. Originally, this matter could still be salvaged. However, after the camp commandant was sent to the hospital, these hooligans did not allow the doctors to save him. As a result, the treatment was delayed and the camp commandant died from excessive blood loss. This incident even alarmed the central government at that time. The Chengdu military district was transferred to the Yuezhou military district, and then to the troops stationed in the port. Finally, an investigation team was set up to clean up Chu County from beginning to end. Chunwa did not know Qinshi's identity, but even if he knew, he would not care. He only knew one thing, and that was that Siping was his territory. No matter how powerful these outsiders were outside, as long as they were in his territory, even a dragon would have to submit to him. This was because he had the final say in this place. Chunwa carried the machete and swaggered in front of Qinshi. He first sized up Qinshi from head to toe, then raised his nose and said to Qinshi with a playful smile, "Where's your wife? Call her out and have a few drinks with us, and I can pretend that this never happened. How about it? I'm letting you off easy." Hearing this, Qinshi looked at him expressionlessly and then said calmly, "You're still young and don't know anything, so I can give you a chance to turn over a new leaf." Chunwa was stunned. He widened his eyes, then put on a very exaggerated expression and said loudly, "What did you say just now? I didn't hear you clearly. Come, say it again." As he spoke, he hooked his machete at Qinshi, then tilted his head and looked like he was all ears. Seeing this, Qinshi smiled slightly and asked, "Hands and feet, which do you think is more important?" "Important, my ass. Son of a bitch." Being ignored like this, Chunwa was like a cat whose tail was stepped on. He held the machete and directly slashed at Qinshi. Even though his right hand was still wrapped in plaster, his knife was still powerful and full of vigor. To be honest, Chunwa also felt a headache when he met such a hothead. He had already put on a show. As long as Chin-shi admitted defeat and was humiliated by him, Chunwa would naturally return home. The hooligan was not brainless. If he really hurt someone, he would have to go to the police station for a few days. Thinking about it, this was not a good deal. Therefore, Spring Child had put on such a big show mainly to scare them. However, what Chunwa did not expect was that Chin-shi did not fall for it at all. This made him a little embarrassed. Since Chin-shi forced him to choose between his face and the police station, he could only choose the former. After all, he still had to survive in this world. If he did not even dare to slash people, how could he work for Lee Diaming in the future? Slashing people was actually a very particular thing. One could not slash the aorta, head, or neck. If one wanted to slash, one should slash the hands, feet, and back. Therefore, Chunwa's machete directly slashed at Chin-shi's right arm. The scene of blood splattering everywhere did not appear because after the machete slashed at Chin-shi's arm, it did not even cut his clothes. Chunwa stared at the strange scene in front of him and instinctively wanted to pull out the machete to slash again. However, at this moment, Chin-shi's voice sounded again. I feel that the hands should be more important than the feet. After all, if you don't have the hands, your daily life will be very inconvenient. If you don't have the feet, you can still install artificial limbs and sit in a wheelchair. It won't affect your daily life too much. If that's the case, then I'll help you choose. I choose the feet. When Chin-shi's voice fell, Chunwa had yet to come back to his senses. However, the machete in his hand had unknowingly landed in Chin-shi's hand. Then, Chin-shi took the machete and gently slashed at Chunwa's thigh. The blade drew a cold glint in the air, flashing between Spring Child's legs before disappearing completely. It was as if nothing had happened. Chin-shi patted Chunwa's shoulder and then stuffed the machete back into his hand. At this moment, Chunwa was like a patient with Alzheimer's. He just stared blankly at Chin-shi's movements. When he saw Chin-shi hand the machete to him, he even foolishly took it. I'll give you a chance to be a new person, but you have to remember that you must be a good person in the future because good people will be rewarded. After saying that, Chin-shi directly walked past Chunwa. Just as Chin-shi walked toward the more than 30 young people behind him, Chunwa suddenly came back to his senses. Mother ***, I'm going to kill you. Chunwa twisted his body and raised the machete to slash at Chin-shi's neck. However, because his movements were too fierce, he instantly lost his balance and fell to the ground. While he was falling, Chunwa was horrified to discover that both of his legs had been severed from the roots. Chapter 232. The machete was just an ordinary machete, but the person who used it was not an ordinary person. Chin-shi poured his quintessential essence into the blade, instantly turning this ordinary machete into the legendary dragon-slaying saber that could cut through iron like mud. Because the speed of the attack was so fast, Spring Baby did not even feel anything after his legs were cut off. Chunwa turned around, wanting to slash at Chin-shi again. However, due to the violent shaking, his wound burst open. He completely lost his balance and fell heavily to the ground. The sudden sharp pain from his thigh made Spring Child howl in pain. Lying on the ground, he struggled to straighten his body and take a look. Only then did he realize that both of his legs had been chopped off, and blood was still spurting out from his thighs. Looking at his broken legs slowly falling to the ground, Spring Baby immediately felt a surge of warmth in his pants. When had he ever seen such a tragic scene? Furthermore, it happened to him. Therefore, this young man, who had been acting like he was the boss of the world, was actually so scared that he peed his pants. In fact, it would have been better if he hadn't seen it. When he saw that his leg had been cut off, Spring Baby was really angry, scared, and in pain, to the extent that the piercing pain caused him to faint on the spot. Seeing this, Chin-shi was very considerate and stopped the bleeding for him. Since he had promised to give Chunwa a chance to turn over a new leaf, then Chin-shi would not take his life. As for the broken leg, because the cut was complete, as long as it was treated in time, there was still a possibility of reattaching it. After all, Hua Xiao's limb replantation technique had always been world-class. However, even if it was connected, Spring Baby would not be able to jump around as lively as she was now. From the moment Spring Baby swung his knife at Qin Shi to the moment Qin Shi seized the knife and cut off Spring Baby's legs, everything happened in the blink of an eye. Spring Child spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. However, the group of youngsters he brought with him was frightened. A few of the more timid ones were so scared that they sat on the ground. After all, the local ruffians were not professional soldiers. Although they were usually noisy, when they really saw this kind of bloody scene, not many of them could keep their calm. Especially now that they were neither drunk nor intoxicated, they still had at least some rationality, so they felt incomparably scared. How was this a human? He was completely a god of death that appeared out of nowhere. He did not even say a few harsh words and directly cut off Spring Baby's legs. It had nothing to do with them in the first place. They were just friends. Could it be that they really had to take revenge for Spring Baby? What if the other party was blinded by rage and killed them? Therefore, at this moment, they ran as fast as they could. Therefore, a very funny scene suddenly appeared in the vast field. Qin Shi slowly walked along the small road in the countryside. The 30 or so people holding the weapons were scared to the point of retreating. It was not until one of the ruffians who was scared out of his wits threw away the stick in his hand that the group of people felt as if they had been splashed with a bucket of cold water. They shivered and ran toward the 108 National Highway. Seeing this, Qin Shi suddenly waved his arm, and a strong wind suddenly blew them all to the ground. Since he was here, he had to leave something for them. For example, a deep memory? When the Siping police station received the news and rushed to the scene, it was already 15 minutes later. The leader was the deputy director of the Siping police station, who was also Spring Baby's second uncle. Everything was going according to plan. Spring Baby first severely injured the person, then left 2 of his brothers to take the blame and let them arrest him. This way, he could give an explanation to the people and also let him get credit for nothing. The plan was perfect. However, when they arrived at Tong Family Ditch, they were completely stunned by the scene in front of them. More than 30 people were lying on the edge of the field and crying. The way he cried for his father and mother was truly heart-wrenching and tearful. On the mud path next to them, a man was sitting on a small bench and starting a fire to roast something. Spring Baby's second uncle was indeed an experienced man. When he saw that the situation was not right, he immediately took out the gun at his waist. The Siping police station only had 2 pistols, one for the director and the deputy director. They could only wear them when they were on duty. This thing was usually just a decoration. No one thought that it would come in handy one day. Spring Baby's second uncle held the pistol and carefully walked toward the young man with 3 policemen. When they were close to the young man, the deputy director suddenly found Spring Baby lying on the ground, and it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. Spring Baby. What happened to you? The deputy director shouted at Spring Baby, but Spring Baby was lying on the ground motionless. After taking a closer look, he realized that Spring Baby's legs had been cut off, and the nearby soil was completely dyed red with blood. This was terrible. The matter was serious. Therefore, he immediately pointed his gun at the young man and shouted, "Hands on your head and squat down. Otherwise, I will shoot." The young man was pointed at by the black muzzle, but he acted as if he did not hear it at all. After slowly flipping the potatoes in the fire with a branch, he turned his head and looked at the mountain behind the deputy director. Then, he smiled thoughtfully and said, "Don't worry, there is still 1 minute." The deputy director was old, and it was the first time he had encountered such a situation, so he could not help but feel a little nervous. After signaling the policeman beside him to go forward and take the young man down, he held the pistol and pointed it at the young man motionlessly, afraid that he would attack the police. One person taking down more than 30 people, it was scary just thinking about it. Just as the 3 policemen carefully approached the young man, a buzzing sound suddenly came from the mountain behind them. The deputy director looked back and saw 3 armed helicopters flying towards them at high speed. The deputy director of the village police station was also an official. He had seen big and small scenes, but it was the first time he saw armed helicopters so close to him, so he was stunned on the spot. Even armed helicopters were here. Was there a war? After the 3 armed helicopters flew over the field, they floated in the air one by one. Then, the hatch opened and 3 gliding ropes were thrown out. Then, 3 teams of fully armed soldiers slid down the gliding ropes from the helicopters. As soon as they landed, the soldiers held their rifles and surrounded the 3 police officers who were dumbfounded. "Don't move. Put your hands on your head and squat down." The deputy director looked at the soldiers with his mouth agape. When he saw that they were pointing their guns at him, he immediately said nervously, "I am a policeman, I am on the same side." However, what he got in response was a standard military action. "Shut up. Put your hands on your head and squat down." She sat on a small bench and flipped the potatoes. After seeing this scene, he could not help but praise. The people from the local police station had just arrived, and the people from Rain City's military division had already arrived. It had to be said that Hua Xia's military was really efficient. The straight-line distance between Rain City and Xing County was more than 80 kilometers. How long had it been since Rain City's military division received the news and sent a team over? It was indeed worthy of praise. After the 3 teams of soldiers descended from the sky and took control of the situation, one of the soldiers strode in front of Chen Shi. After saluting Chen Shi, the soldier said loudly, reporting to the chief, "The enemy is under our control, please give your orders." The deputy director hugged his head and squatted on the ground. The moment he heard this, he almost vomited blood. Chapter 233. The old house was very lively now. There were 7 adults and 2 children. Li Taidan and Xue Shuzhen were guests after all, so Aunt Zhang had been warmly telling them to eat more. However, this made the 2 northerners feel extremely awkward, and they were restless all the time. They had been in the army for a long time, so they were indeed not used to this unique taste of life. Therefore, after a quick dinner, the 2 of them ran to the courtyard as if they were escaping. Then, each of them guarded one side, standing there like javelins. The little girl held a spoon and glanced at their backs. Then, she asked in confusion, "Daddy, Uncle's stomach is so big. Why does he eat less than me?" These childish words immediately amused everyone present and made them burst out laughing. The guards had their responsibilities. Iron Ball Li and Xue Shuzhen had a mission. They didn't come here for a vacation, so they didn't need Chen Shi's instructions. They took the initiative to fulfill their responsibilities. Guarding was also one of the missions. There were 4 rooms in the old house, and they were just right to be occupied when the 2 of them arrived. When they were sleeping at night, Aunt Zhang was worried that the 2 men would feel uncomfortable squeezing into a 1.5-meter wide bed, so she wanted to change rooms with them. However, the 2 of them righteously refused. Although the bed was only 1.5-meter wide, it was very comfortable with Aunt Zhang's mattress. Lying on it was even more comfortable than lying on their bed in the military camp. Moreover, the 2 of them would not rest at the same time. This was because they had already divided the night duty. Li Taidan would be on duty for the first half of the night, and Xue Shuzhen would be on duty for the second half. They really did not relax for even a moment. As for whether Chen Shi needed protection or not, that was not a question they needed to consider. The next morning, Aunt Zhang discussed with Chen Shi that it was time to return to Chengdu. The conflict with the local hooligans was one of the reasons, but the main reason was that Xia Pinglin and Kai Shuqin were going to work in 2 days. After all, the spring festival had already passed, and the couple's work was considered to have started relatively late. It was time to prepare to start their lives again. The little girl's experience in the countryside was quite pleasant, but when she heard her grandmother say that they were going back to Chengdu, she immediately jumped up in excitement. Looking at her posture, it seemed that she did not want to stay here for a moment longer. Children were more interested in the big city with its colorful scenery. Seeing this, Chen Shi called the driver and asked him to drive from the county to pick everyone up. However, when they were about to leave, a small incident occurred. Because the GL8 could only seat 7 people, but now Chen Shi's family, including Li Taidan and Xue Shuzhen, had a total of 9 people. Therefore, Li Taidan insisted that the driver get off the car, and he sat in the driver's seat. The driver couldn't dissuade him. In the end, he could only obediently rent a van with Xue Shuzhen. They didn't speak along the way. By the time they returned to Chengdu, it was already 2 in the afternoon. The atmosphere of the Spring Festival had completely disappeared. Chengdu, a first-tier city of the new generation, had also returned to the bustling scene of the past. After the family carried the local specialties they brought back home, they discussed going to Jinli for a stroll. Jinli was just opposite. The little fellow had been here twice but had not been able to go into play due to various reasons. This time, she could finally go in and have some fun. However, just as everyone was walking out of the house and waiting to cross the road, Chen Shi's phone suddenly rang. The caller was Qin Xueqing. Chen Shi picked up the phone. As soon as he said hello, his sister-in-law on the other end of the phone went straight to the point. "I need your help with something." When Chen Shi heard this, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He had just asked Wu Lian for a favor. How long had it been since Wu Lian asked him to return the favor? Go ahead. There was a strange phenomenon in Karakoram. Just like the Taklamakan Desert, a large oasis suddenly appeared. Karakoram? What's that? When Chen Shi heard this term, he was stunned. Now that he had a photographic memory, he was very sure that he had never heard of this term before. At the border, next to the Himalayas. Later, Qin Xueqing told Chen Shi the details of the matter. There was no need to introduce the Himalayas because Mount Everest stood there. The Karakoram was next to the Himalayas. This mountain range was also the place with the highest concentration of glaciers in the world, so it was known as the most dangerous place in the world. And the little-known second highest mountain in the world, Chogori Peak, was actually here. Chogori Peak was 8,611 meters above sea level, only more than 200 meters lower than Mount Everest, but its limelight was completely overshadowed by Mount Everest. In fact, in terms of difficulty, Chogori Peak was the most difficult mountain in the world to climb. It was also the only independent mountain that had not been successfully climbed in winter so far. A simple description, but behind it were the bodies of countless climbers left on Chogori Peak. Why had no one ever succeeded in winter climbing here? A big reason was that the Himalayas itself were easier to climb than the Karakoram. In fact, the altitude of the two mountains was not much different, but it was not until 1954 that someone successfully stepped into and returned from the Karakoram for the first time. The terrain here was steep, and most of the peaks were sharp and steep in shape. There were snowy peaks and huge glaciers everywhere. Not to mention climbing Chogori Peak, as long as one stepped into the Karakoram, the mortality rate was as high as 30% at an altitude of more than 5,000 meters. Was this not enough to make people feel intimidated? It was not famous, but the mortality rate was extremely high. Over time, Chogori Peak and the Karakoram were naturally not known by ordinary people. Why did Wu Lian want to ask Chen Shi for help? It was because that place was not a place where humans could survive at all. The desert becoming an oasis itself was ridiculous enough, but now, even the snowy mountains that had not melted for thousands of years suddenly had a large oasis. This kind of special event that did not conform to the laws of nature naturally attracted the attention of the world. Just like aliens invading Earth, if a few aliens were caught, maybe they could get some benefits from it. Therefore, after Wu Lian received the news, she had already begun to prepare and was bound to go to the area to investigate. Although his sister-in-law did not say it clearly, after Chen Shi thought about it, he immediately figured out the key, so he directly pointed out the real reason why Wu Lian asked him to help. In other words, now that place has become the focus of the world. If I go, it is very likely that I will meet people from other countries there. It should be, but their speed should not be as fast as ours. After listening, Chen Shi stood on the side of the road and carefully thought about it. Chapter 234. The whole family was prepared to wait for Qin Shi to finish his call before crossing the road. On the other end of the phone, Qin Wanqing didn't rush him. Qin Shi didn't have to think for long before he came to a decision and replied, "Not going." It was a very simple word, and it didn't even explain the reason. Qin Shueqing didn't seem to have any intention of persuading him, so when she heard Qin Shi's answer, she calmly replied, "Okay." After that, her sister-in-law hung up the phone. She was decisive and didn't hesitate. This was her usual style. Today was Tuesday. Although Jinli wasn't as full as it was during the spring festival, it was still bustling with people. Jinli was right next to the Wuhou Temple, but the Wuhou Temple charged entrance fees while Jinli didn't. The little girl stood by the roadside and looked around. She had no interest in the marquee shrine, which was full of culture and culture. Thus, the whole family walked into the brocade with smiles on their faces as she called out to them. In fact, Jinli wasn't a building from ancient times. It was a group of buildings built in the later period. The style leaned towards the end of the Ming dynasty and the beginning of the Qing dynasty. It was mainly for business and was only 550 meters long. After staying in Hohai for a long time, the little fellow seemed to have developed a certain immunity to this kind of old building. Thus, after walking around for a while, she pouted. She wasn't interested in the tea houses or shops at all. It wasn't until she saw a candy stand that the little fellow's big round eyes finally lit up. Candy blowing and candy drawing originated from the same source. Nowadays, people were particular about hygiene. They would take a few bites of candy drawings, but candy figurines were basically just for fun. When they lost interest, they would throw them away. Children didn't understand so much. After clamoring for Qin Shi to buy one for her, the little fellow happily took the candy figurine in her hands and licked it. Because the candy-blowing figurine was directly blown up by the master of the candy figurine, naturally saliva would come out when blowing. Thus, Aunt Zhang had the same thought as most people. She felt that it was very unhygienic and immediately stopped the little fellow's actions, warning her not to eat anymore. The little guy was brought up by Auntie Zhang, so Auntie Zhang's words were naturally very effective. Hence, the little guy could only pout and look at the sugar figurine in his hand with an aggrieved expression. Seeing this, Qin Shi did not expose Aunt Zhang. Instead, he went to the ice cream shop next door and bought an ice cream cone for the little girl. Then, he used the ice cream cone to exchange for the little girl's ice cream. There were only a few places to play in Chengdu. Compared to Shangjing, it was a little shabby. After strolling around Jinli, they could still go to the narrow alleys to take a look. The slight difference between Broad and Narrow Alley and Jinli Alley was that Broad and Narrow Alley was renovated from an old street. Therefore, Broad and Narrow Alley's cultural heritage was much stronger than that of Jinli Alley. Although it was also a commercial street, people could feel the unique cultural heritage of the old Chengdu city. It would take them at most an hour to finish their stroll in Jinli, so Qin Shi suggested that they go to Broad and Narrow Alley again, but the little fellow decisively rejected his suggestion. This kind of aimless wandering really didn't appeal to the child, so she clamored to go home and watch TV. After all, Aunt Zhang was old. After strolling around Jinli, she was obviously a little tired. If they went to Broad and Narrow Alley again, the old woman would probably have to wait outside. Therefore, Qin Shi had to agree to the little fellow's request to go home and watch TV. Just as the family was about to go home, Qin Ruoying's phone suddenly rang. The couple's social circle was extremely narrow, so the moment her phone rang, Qin Shi could not help but turn his head to look at Qin Ruoying. "Hello? Second aunt? Yingying, what have you been doing recently?" "Visiting Aunt Zhang in Chengdu." "Oh, how is it? Is Chengdu fun?" "It's okay." Qin Ruoying looked at Qin Shi thoughtfully while talking on the phone. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but shake his head. The caller was Wang Chuanju. Seeing that her sister-in-law did not manage to persuade her cheap brother-in-law, Wang Chuanju suddenly could not sit still. Sure enough, after chatting with Qin Ruoying for a while, Wang Chuanju asked tentatively, "You two don't have any plans recently, right?" "I want to ask Qin Shi for a favor." Do you think it's okay? Hearing this, Qin Ruoying smiled and said directly, "Second aunt, I can't make this decision. You can ask him directly." Oh, okay. Qin Ruoying's answer was obviously a little out of Wang Chuanju's expectations, so she could only laugh twice awkwardly. After all, she was not that familiar with Qin Shi, so she thought of asking Qin Ruoying to ask Qin Shi for help. She did not expect Qin Ruoying to directly kick the ball back to her. From this, it could be seen that Wang Chuanju still knew too little about this niece. Falling flowers have no words, people are as indifferent as chrysanthemums. The beauty of a book is readable. What was the most important thing for a husband and wife to get along? It was mutual respect. Qin Ruoying handed the phone to Qin Shi. After Qin Shi took the phone, he couldn't help but reach out and hold Qin Ruoying's hand. The couple looked at each other tacitly. Qin Shi smiled and said to the phone, "Hello? Second aunt?" "Hey, Qin Shi, it's like this, there's something I need your help with." "Did Yuan Qin call you just now?" "Yes, she told me briefly just now." "Are you referring to the matter of Karakoram?" Yes. Did Yuan Qin not tell you clearly?" "We don't have enough people here, so I want to ask you to help lead a team to see the specific situation there. Do you think it's okay?" "Yes, of course. Didn't I promise you that I would make a guest appearance on your show? Send me the time and place, I promise to be there on time." Qin Shi's words were said very quickly. It seemed that he did not even need to think about it and directly agreed. After hearing his words, Wang Chuanju on the other end of the phone went silent. She now understood that Qin Shi was waiting for her here. After the Chunhua incident, why did Wu Lian have such a big reaction? It was because Wang Chuanju wanted to completely pull Qin Shi into the Wu Lian through the exchange of favors. After all, favors were not easy to repay. But she obviously underestimated Qin Shi's determination to distance himself from Wu Lian. Qin Shi always remembered the promise he made to Wang Chuanju. He could help, but only once. The reason why he decisively said no to his sister-in-law was because he knew that Wang Chuanju would definitely not be able to resist calling him personally to ask for help. Since that was the case, then he would use his previous promise here. Life was life, work was work. Although Qin Shi admired Wang Chuanju's spirit of serving the country wholeheartedly, if he also became like this, it would obviously go against his original intention. After all, compared to his career, Qin Shi loved his family more. If he had that much time, he might as well accompany the little one to watch cartoons. Wang Chuanju was silent for a long time. After Qin Shi said hello, her slightly disappointed voice came from the other end of the phone. Then I'll really trouble you this time. You know the latitude and longitude, right? I'll send the coordinates to your phone later. When can we leave?" Chapter 235. The earth would not stop spinning without anyone. The reason why Wang Chuanju wanted to ask Qin Shi for help was only because Qin Shi once captured a celestial being alive. Sun Wen was now tortured by heart-devouring ants all day long, and the amazing destructive power he displayed during his madness also gave Wu Lian the most intuitive evaluation of Qin Shi's combat power. The West also had existences similar to warriors or necromancers, but they did not have so many complicated divisions. In the West, the strength of the strong was generally expressed in letters, from F to A, and a separate S-class. The so-called S-class was actually equivalent to Hua Xia's celestial being realm. S-class was already powerful enough, but there was a special level above S-class, EX-class. EX, extreme, meant the limit. Wu Lian's evaluation of Sun Wen was S+, so Qin Shi, who could capture Sun Wen alive, was naturally the legendary EX-class. EX-class, the strongest in the celestial being realm, was also the strongest in the entire human race. He was worthy of being the uncrowned king. Qin Shi put on a posture of wanting to completely distance himself from Wu Lian. Wang Chuanju was a smart person, so she naturally would not say anything at this time. After all, compared to a verbal promise, the recognition in the heart was actually more important. Not long after She hung up the phone, Li Tian's phone suddenly rang. When he saw the number on the screen, he gave Shuezhen a look, then walked to the wall. After looking around, he picked up the phone with a serious face. Seeing this, She could not help but smile slightly. Looking at this situation, it was estimated that these two northeastern guys would have to go on a long trip with him. It was night. Karakoram Mountains, Rivertail Beach Military Base. Among all the civilian airports in Huaxia, the Rice City Aden Airport had the highest altitude, with an altitude of 4,411 meters. Therefore, it became the highest civilian airport in the world. Rice City's Aden Airport was already very high above sea level, but compared to the airport in the Rivertail Beach Military Base, it still paled in comparison. The Hawaii Beach Military Base was located in the middle of the Karakoram Mountains, 5,418 meters above sea level. It was one of the important bases of the Western Border Defense Army of Huaxia. This place was covered in snow and ice all year round. It was extremely cold, lacked oxygen, had low pressure, and was exposed to strong ultraviolet rays and cosmic rays. The natural environment was extremely bad, and even the Tibetan antelope could not survive. If it was daytime, one would find that there were only 3 colors left in this vast world: the white snow, the brown soil, and the blue sky. Not a single tree or blade of grass could be seen here. It was a forbidden zone where not even plants could survive. Tonight, the temperature was as low as -40 degrees Celsius, but the Rivertail Beach Military Base was brightly lit. A military tactical transport aircraft tore through the night sky like a giant dragon. It was not afraid of the whistling wind and snow, and it quickly slid down from a distant mountain peak. The transport aircraft landed on the runway of the military base at the Rivertail Beach. Then, 3 people walked out of the cabin. Li Tian was wrapped in a thick military cotton-padded jacket. Although he was already mentally prepared and had put on a portable oxygen respirator, the moment he stepped out of the cabin, Li Tian's vision suddenly blurred, and his feet immediately staggered. What did it mean to be 5,000 meters above sea level? The atmospheric pressure and oxygen content were less than half of the standard value. Even if he walked barehanded, it was equivalent to carrying 35 kilograms of weight. The aircraft had pressurization and oxygen supply devices. When cruising, the air pressure in the cabin was equivalent to about 2,500 meters above sea level. Therefore, even if he flew at an altitude of 10,000 meters, it would not affect the human body. The so-called altitude sickness was mainly caused by the sudden drop in the external air pressure, causing the pressure in the human body to increase continuously. It was like suddenly having a balloon that was constantly inflating in the body. The balloon expanded and pressed on the brain, nerves and internal organs, causing all kinds of discomfort. Therefore, even if Li Tian was wearing an oxygen respirator, he still had difficulty breathing at this moment, and his legs felt weak. She stood behind them. After seeing their uncomfortable appearance, he quietly released a trace of true spirit, thus slightly alleviating the discomfort of the two. A group of soldiers stood under the gangway. After seeing them walk out of the cabin, the soldiers saluted in unison. Seeing this, She also saluted back to them, then patted Li Tian and Shuezhen, indicating them to walk faster. The terrain of the Karakoram Mountains was dangerous, and it was a place that must be fought for. Therefore, no matter how bad the environment was, there was always a border defense army stationed here. To be honest, being stationed in this place was no different from being stationed at the gate of hell. The soldiers were completely protecting the country and guarding the border with their lives. The Rivertail Beach military base was not big. It was not even as big as the fake military base in the Golden Triangle. As far as the eye could see, there was only an airport runway and 3 houses. The 3 houses looked ordinary, but the interior was full of new polystyrene insulation materials. The ground was covered with marble tiles, the windows were double-layered vacuum insulation glass, and the radiators that could be seen everywhere constantly emitted bursts of heat, keeping the indoor temperature around 20 degrees Celsius. After all, the war between Xia and India had been over for more than 50 years. With the growing strength of Xia, the living conditions of the soldiers should naturally get better and better. The soldier led Chen Shi and his group to a room similar to a conference room. There seemed to be a meeting inside. The soldier knocked on the door, and after a "please come in" came from inside, the soldier gestured to Chen Shi. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not hesitate and directly pushed the door and walked in. The conference room was very lively. With a cursory glance, there were at least 20 people sitting inside. And just as Chen Shi pushed the door open, everyone in the room cast their eyes on him. Although Li Taidan and Xue Shu did not have much experience in society, this did not mean that they did not know the ways of the world. Almost at the same time, both of them found that the atmosphere in the conference room seemed to be a bit strange, so they slowed down a little and subconsciously pulled away from Chen Shi. Because he did not want to appear too different, Chen Shi wore a military coat today for the first time. He calmly adjusted his coat and found that no one in the conference room seemed to want to talk, so he slowly scanned the people in the room and smiled. "Hello everyone, do I need to introduce myself?" Hearing this, the people in the conference room were like puppets that were touched by a mechanism, and instantly stood up in unison. Those in military uniforms saluted him, and those without military uniforms bowed slightly. Everyone saluted him at the same time and greeted him, "Mr. Chen, hello." Chapter 236. Chen Shi was specially invited by Wang Chuanjiu to lead the team. Naturally, Wu Lian would forward his information to the military base at Hue Beach in advance. Although he did not have an official position, Wu Lian's evaluation of him at the level of EX was enough to make him respectable. That was why Chen Shi received such a grand welcome when he entered the room. "Hello everyone, I'm Chen Shi." Chen Shi smiled and nodded to everyone present. There were more than 20 people in the conference room. Only 1/3 of them were in military uniforms, and the rest were in casual clothes. Chen Shi looked around discreetly and found that the weakest among these people was at the transforming strength stage. He suddenly understood. At the front row of the conference table, there were 2 middle-aged men wearing glasses. At first glance, one could tell that they were the kind of high-class talents who were involved in scientific research. Chen Shi walked into the conference room with Li Taidan and Xue Shuzhen. At this time, the man in military uniform standing at the main seat nodded to Chen Shi. Then, he smiled and said to everyone present, "Since Mr. Chen is here, I'll explain it from the beginning. Is everyone okay with that?" Chen Shi was the leader of this mission. Naturally, no one present had any objections. Therefore, after he took his seat, the man in military uniform got up and went to the tactical blackboard in the corner of the conference room. On the tactical blackboard, there was already a map-like pattern, as well as many arrows with unknown meanings. Looking at the design, it was estimated that this was the location of the mission. After the oasis appeared, all countries have activated signal jammers in this area, causing the surrounding communication systems to be completely paralyzed. So, I can only draw a sketch of the mission area for everyone to see. Everyone, please take a look. This is the area where the mission is located, the Kashmir region. The core area where the oasis is located is not within the actual control of our army. So, this mission has a certain degree of danger. I hope everyone is mentally prepared. Chen Shi was there to help this time, so he had to follow Wu Lian's request and lead several relevant experts to the area to conduct scientific research. There were 2 reasons why he agreed to Wang Chuanjiu's request. First, he wanted to fulfill his promise. Second, he was very interested in the natural phenomenon caused by the revival of spiritual energy. Chen Shi wanted to see how an oasis could appear at -30 degrees Celsius. Could it be that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth had the effect of changing the temperature? The man in military uniform who stood on the rostrum to tell everyone the details of the mission was the head of the Rivertail Beach military camp, Tian Runcheng. Tian Runcheng had been stationed in this area for 7 years, so he knew everything around him like the back of his hand. The so-called Kashmir region was actually somewhat similar to the Golden Triangle. It was the junction of Xia, India, and Ba country. The northwestern part of this region was controlled by Ba country, the southern part was controlled by India, and the northeastern part of Aksai Chin was Hua Xia's territory. Both India and Pakistan claimed sovereignty over the whole of Kashmir, so there had always been disputes in this area. San was really shameless. In fact, most of Kashmir used to be Hua Xia territory. More than 50 years ago, San launched a war against Hua Xia. At that time, Hua Xia had just been established and had experienced several large-scale battles, including the North Vietnamese War and the Korean War. It was when the national strength was at its weakest, so San took the opportunity to launch an invasion war against Hua Xia. Although Hua Xia was caught off guard by the Hindustanis in the beginning, after they reacted, they counterattacked and advanced triumphantly, forcing the Hindustanis to retreat. Their advance troops were 212 kilometers deep into the hinterland of India, almost reaching the capital of the Hindustanis, New Delhi. In this battle, 4,885 Asan people died and 3,968 were captured. Hua Xia people died and 697 were injured. So if you traveled to Karakoram now, you would see no less than 10 martyrs' cemeteries along the way. Behind the simple numbers, the soldiers only knew how to die for their country on the battlefield. There was no need to bury their bodies on the battlefield. Although they won, they lost. After this battle, Hua Xia, as the victor, did not pursue Asan. Instead, they took the initiative to stop the war and returned the prisoners and weapons to Asan. They also retreated 20 kilometers from the original control line to Aksai Chin behind the Karakoram Mountains. These 20 kilometers were the current northern part of Kashmir. The oasis appeared at the intersection of the three countries' territories, the core area of Kashmir, the Siachen Glacier. The Siachen Glacier was located in the southern part of the Karakoram Mountains, with an average elevation of more than 6,000 meters. Even in summer, it was a world of ice and snow. The temperature was -20 degrees during the day and -50 degrees at night. The environment was extremely bad and not suitable for any creatures to survive. Since ancient times, it had been an uninhabited area. Although the environment was bad, it was a military important place like Shanhai Pass. To the north, one could overlook Hua Xia, and to the west, one could nibble away at Ba country. Therefore, Asen attached great importance to this place and sent heavy troops to guard it all year round. Once Hua Xia or Ba country relaxed, San would immediately send troops to nibble away. If they could occupy an inch, they would occupy an inch. They were like a wild dog that liked to snatch food everywhere. It was really disgusting. After Hua Xia retreated to the northern part of the Karakoram Mountains, India and Ba country often fought in this area. Therefore, this place became the battlefield with the highest elevation and the worst natural conditions in the world. Tian Runching pointed to the tactical blackboard and introduced all the questions related to the mission. Chen Shi realized that he had taken over a big burden from Wang Chuanju. This was not the first time an oasis had appeared, but it had always appeared within the borders of various countries. For example, Taklamakan was in the hinterland of Hua Xia. Wu Lian could investigate it at any time. But this time was different. Although the Siachen Glacier was controlled by Asan, it was not recognized by Hua Xia, Ba country, or even other countries in the world. Therefore, this was a territory without sovereignty. Any resources produced in this place naturally had a share. Therefore, Wu Lian planned this operation. However, there was a problem. Although no one recognized that this area belonged to San, San had actual control over this area. In order to not cause unnecessary trouble, this mission could only be carried out in secret and mainly focused on secret investigations. Although Tian Runching did not say it explicitly, the meaning in his words was very clear. This mission could only be carried out in secret. Once they were discovered by San and a fight broke out, the Hawaii Beach military base would not send reinforcements. This was because this was their personal behavior and could not represent Hua Xia. It was precisely because of this that Wu Lian sent out all their elites. Wang Chuanju even used Chen Shi's promise to ask him to come out. In fact, it was just to ensure the success of this mission. Chen Shi sat in his seat and did not speak. After carefully thinking about it, he could not help but frown slightly. This was not the first time an oasis had appeared. Why did Wu Lian attach so much importance to it? What was inside? Chapter 237. The next morning. Chengdu, Wuhou Temple Street. The little fellow was brought into the bathroom by Qin Ruoying in a daze. After washing up, she was like a charged robot. Her big eyes sparkled, and her whole body was full of the kind of vitality that only belonged to children. When she came to the kitchen, Qin pinched her little face and asked with a smile, "Nian Nian, today's breakfast is made by Daddy. Do you like it?" Hearing this, the little thing immediately nodded her head like she was pounding garlic. Although Qin didn't say what she was making, she didn't hide the fact that she wanted to try it. Because, Daddy's work must be the best. These days, Aunt Zhang and Qin Ruoying had been cooking. Although it was delicious, compared with Qin's cooking, it seemed that there was something lacking. The porridge was not ready yet, so the little thing tiptoed beside the cupboard, wrinkling her little nose and sniffing the fragrance from the casserole. The gluttonous child swallowed her saliva and looked at Qin eagerly. After he scooped out a bowl, she raised her hands and wanted to take it, but was gently patted away by Qin. "Be careful, it's hot. Go sit at the table first. Daddy will bring it to you." Hearing this, the little thing ran to the dining table and climbed onto the chair. It sat on the chair and kept swinging its legs. It really looked like it was unable to endure the thirst. Today's breakfast was red bean and barley porridge. Barley was a Chinese medicine. It was sweet and cool, and had the effect of eliminating spots, acne, and acne. Taking barley regularly could be very good for beauty and make the skin more delicate. At the same time, barley could also remove dampness, promote blood circulation, and play the role of promoting blood circulation, relieving pain, and regulating menstruation and reducing swelling. The little fellow liked sweets, so Qin added a little bit of rock sugar when cooking the porridge. She picked up the spoon and tasted it. It was sweet and sticky, and seemed to have a strange fragrance, so she took the spoon and scooped another spoonful. After smacking her lips twice, the little thing grinned with satisfaction and said, "Papa, it's delicious. Good girl, eat more if it's delicious." After Qin gave Qin Ruoying a bowl of porridge, he patted her head and sat down beside her. He said in a negotiating tone, "Nian Nian, Dad has something to do today. Let Mom accompany you to Happy Valley later, okay?" The moment Qin mentioned the Happy Valley, the little thing's eyes lit up and it hurriedly nodded. "All right. I want to go to Happy Valley. Then Daddy will go out. You have to listen to Mommy, okay?" "I know. Good girl, give me a kiss." Qin put his face in front of the little girl and pointed at his own cheek. Seeing this, the little fellow cooperated and smacked on Qin's face, leaving a shallow mark on his cheek. "Bye, Papa." The little guy sat on the chair, twisting his body and waving his little hand at Qin. At this time, Qin Ruoying also smiled at Qin and said, "Be careful." "Okay." Qin nodded lightly, then turned and walked out of the house with a smile on his face. At this moment, their family of 3 was the most ordinary of all the happy families in the world. Rivertail Beach Military Base. 9 a.m. in the morning was actually very late for soldiers. Li Taidan and Xue Shuzhen stood outside Qin's room. The two of them were wondering who should wake Qin up. The operation code name for this mission was Kunluan, and Qin was the person in charge. Because of the weather, they had to wait until 10 a.m. before they could set off. Although it was not time to set off yet, the members of the small team had already gathered and were now in the living room discussing the route they would take and the difficulties they might encounter along the way. At this time, as the leader, Qin was still sleeping in his room. Naturally, his bodyguards were worried sick. Li Taidan hesitated for a while, and finally could not help but go up and knock on the door. However, the door suddenly opened. Qin looked at the 2 frowning men and could not help but ask in confusion, "What's wrong?" "Nothing, Li Tai-dan was stunned for a moment, then quickly replied, Mr. He thinks the weather is good today, so he wanted to discuss with you to see if we could set off an hour earlier. Okay, then let's go. Chen Shi nodded, then directly walked past the two of them. Seeing this, Xue Shuzhen quickly asked, Brother Chen, do you want me to go to the kitchen to heat up something for you? No, I've already eaten. Let's go. You've already eaten? When? Hearing this, Li Tai-dan and Xue Shuzhen could not help but look at each other. Both of them had some doubts in their eyes. Even when the two of them were eating or going to the bathroom, one of them would stay outside Chen Shi's room, so they were very sure that Chen Shi did not leave his room at all. So the question was, when did Chen Shi have breakfast? When Chen Shi came downstairs, all the people from the meeting last night were present. When Tian Runqing saw Chen Shi coming downstairs, he immediately stepped forward and said a few words to him. After that, the group was ready to leave. The weather today was very good, and the sun was shining brightly outside. The dazzling sunlight reflected off the snowy mountains, making it almost impossible to open one's eyes. However, although the sun was shining, the temperature was still minus 20 degrees Celsius. Among the 25 people traveling with Chen Shi, there were 4 scholars. They were all experts in various fields, such as ecology, environmental science, botany, geology, etc. Looking at this situation, Wu Lian really wanted to rely on science to find the reason why the glacier turned into an oasis. 3 military helicopters set off from the Hawaii Beach base, then went straight to the Klechin River Valley. This was the border of Huaxia, so the helicopters could not fly any further. Therefore, the group got off the helicopter in the Klechin River Valley, then transferred to the all-terrain vehicle provided by the military, and drove along the valley all the way to the Siachen Glacier. The Hawaii Beach was on the sunny side of the Karakoram Mountains, so there was plenty of sunshine, so the snow did not cover all the rocks and soil. The Klechin River Valley was on the shady side of the mountains, so the terrain was relatively gentle. In addition, the snow did not melt all year round, so it had become a thick layer of glacier. The glacier poured down from the top of the high mountain, and the sun shone, immediately reflecting a dazzling light. It could be described as golden, magnificent, and glorious. The huge ice cave and steep ice bridge were just like the legendary Crystal Palace. Chen Shi took out his mobile phone, wanting to take a few photos to show to the little girl. However, when he took out his mobile phone, he found that it could not be turned on. The magnetic field in this place was so strong that digital products such as mobile phones and computers were completely turned into bricks. From the valley to the Siachen Glacier, it was actually more than 40 kilometers away. The all-terrain vehicle moved quickly along the ice of the valley. Less than half an hour later, Chen Shi and the group successfully stepped into the Siachen Glacier. Just as they stepped into the Siachen Glacier, the originally clear sky was suddenly covered by a large patch of dark clouds, and the heavens and earth instantly darkened. Chapter 238. The climate of the plateau changed rapidly, and the temperature difference between day and night was huge. All the temperature came from the direct sunlight. Therefore, when the sun was covered by the thick dark clouds, the temperature suddenly dropped a lot. Due to the effect of the atmospheric thermal circulation, the wind during the day would blow from the bottom of the valley to the top of the mountain. However, at night, the wind would blow from the top of the mountain to the valley. This phenomenon was the so-called valley wind. Although it was still morning, because the sun was blocked by the dark clouds, the mountain wind began to blow from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the valley. Chen Shi and the others drove in the Klechin River Valley. The mountain winds suddenly blew, and the snowflakes dancing in the sky suddenly scattered into the valley. The sky was dark, and the heavy snow gradually blurred the vision. The driver was a scout under Tian Runqing. After seeing the situation, his reaction was very fast. He drove the all-terrain vehicle directly to the rocky slope on the side of the valley. As the saying went, there are not many avalanches on rocky slopes in dense forests, but there are more avalanches on slopes where snow eaves are lee of the wind. Both sides of the Klechin River Valley were full of glaciers and snow. It was very dangerous to stay in the valley when the wind blew, because if you were not careful, you could be buried alive by the snow. The military all-terrain vehicle used tank tracks. It ran along the 70 to 80 degree snow slope as if it was running on flat ground, kicking up a lot of snow as it went straight to the mountainside. When the slope was less than 20 degrees, it was generally impossible for an avalanche to occur. Therefore, when the all-terrain vehicle drove into the valley, it directly rushed toward the open and gentle slope. The Siachen Glacier was the largest of the many glaciers in the vicinity. The snow fell from the top of the Karakoram Mountains to the valley, and finally formed such a large glacier. This place was barren, and there were no animals, so it was also called the end of the world. The Hindustani army had been stationed in the Siachen Glacier for nearly 30 years. In the past 30 years, the number of Hindustani soldiers who died because of non-war reasons had reached as high as 9,000 people. This was the shady side of the mountain, and the conditions were much worse than the beach at the end of the river. The Hindustani soldiers were at such a high altitude, and it was very difficult for them to eat and walk. In addition to physical injuries such as amputation and frostbite, they also had to endure prematurely aging, memory loss, impotence, and other conditions caused by environmental factors. These brought great mental stress to the soldiers. Therefore, the end of the world was not necessarily heaven, but hell. The snowstorm was getting heavier and heavier. Like a summer shower, the violent mountain winds carried countless snowflakes as they whistled from the horizon. A blizzard was coming. Seeing this, the driver had no choice but to stop the car next to a huge rock. The three all-terrain vehicles formed a temporary position in a tripartite formation. The group could only sit in the vehicles and wait for the blizzard to subside. In Chen Shi's car, other than the driver, Tai Danli, and Xue Shuzhen, the rest were all scientific researchers who were national treasures. After the middle-aged man called Professor, he glanced at the situation outside the window. He couldn't help but frown and muttered to himself, "I contacted the Weather Detection Center before we set off. Today should be a sunny day, why is there a sudden snowstorm?" When the scholar next to Professor he heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. Is the weather forecast reliable? These words amused the people in the carriage, and they couldn't help but shake their heads and laugh. In fact, with the current technology, the weather forecast was quite accurate. At least within a few hours, the accuracy rate would be as high as 90%. The people in the room were all environmental and climate experts, so this was more like a joke. Just as they were chatting and relaxing, the driver seemed to hear a rumbling sound. However, the wind outside was too loud, so he wondered if he heard wrong. Therefore, he poked his head forward and continued to observe through the front window. The driver looked for a while, but because his vision was completely blocked by the blizzard, he couldn't see anything clearly. Suddenly, Chen Shi, who was sitting in the passenger seat with his eyes closed, opened his eyes. "Sit in the car, don't move." After Chen Shi said this, he opened the car door. The driver was dumbfounded. The car was heated by an engine, so it was very warm inside. However, the temperature outside was already as low as -50 degrees. What did -50 degrees mean? Even peeing would cause a parabola to appear in the air. Chen Shi suddenly walked out of the car in the snowstorm. As a security guard, Ironly couldn't just sit by and watch. Therefore, he called out "Brother Chen Shi" loudly and tried to get out of the car to drag him back. However, no matter how hard Ironly tried, he could not open the car door. After trying to no avail, Ironly had no choice but to lean against the window anxiously. He kept banging on the window in an attempt to call Chen Shi back. Chen Shi didn't look back. His figure quickly disappeared into the snowstorm. Ironly could only make a sound that was close to a wail. Actually, the driver didn't hear wrong. There was indeed a rumbling sound outside. It wasn't the sound of the wind, but an avalanche. The motorcade was parked in a relatively gentle location. Normally, there was no way they would be affected by an avalanche. However, for some reason, two nearby mountains experienced an avalanche at the same time. Snow poured down from the top of the mountain like a flood. It was getting bigger and bigger, splashing up countless snowflakes as it pressed down from the top of the mountain. This sudden avalanche was not an ordinary pine snow avalanche. It was the most deadly type of avalanche. The snow had already turned into ice. Huge chunks of ice kept falling down like rolling stones. It was at least a few million tons. Millions of tons of snow rolled down from the top of the mountain faster and faster. Like two white snow dragons soaring through the clouds, they whizzed down along the two sides of the mountain, bringing with them a majestic and unparalleled power, sweeping away everything in their path. At this rate, the motorcade would be flattened by the snow before they could leave. After all, in front of the fury of nature, humans were extremely small. She stood in the vast expanse of white snow, as if she was touching a piece of white paper with a pen, almost imperceptible. Due to the acceleration of gravity, the snow was falling faster and faster. In the end, it was almost 100 meters per second, which was 360 kilometers per second. This was the speed of a top supercar. In the momentum formula derived from Newton's second law, Ft equals mv. Then there was a problem. Millions of tons of snow falling at a speed of 100 meters per second. How much impact would it have on the objects below? She raised his head. His gaze pierced through the snow and saw the situation on the mountain. Then, a long sword of frost and snow suddenly appeared in his hand. Boom! The two white dragons collided on the plains where the motorcade was located. In an instant, a powdery snow cloud hundreds of meters high was set off. In an instant, there was only a vast expanse of whiteness left. Chapter 239. The two avalanches almost reached the foot of the mountain at the same time, and then collided on the plateau below. But because the angle was less than 45 degrees, the collision did not slow down the momentum of the avalanches. Instead, the power of the two avalanches suddenly gathered in one place. The two white snow dragons instantly merged into one, and with an even more violent momentum, they continued to fiercely pounce on the plateau below the mountain. The snowstorm filled the sky, and the snow clouds wreaked havoc. The white dragon roared at the sky, and the rumbling sound was like winter thunder, constantly reverberating and shaking the mountains more than 6,000 meters above sea level. Just listening to the sound was enough to make people's hearts tremble. This violent force of millions of tons did not stop after pouncing from the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain. Instead, with an unstoppable force, it continued to pounce forward along the slope. Everywhere the snow dragon passed, a thick snow fog rose. Large amounts of powdery snow clouds with ice shards, like fragments of grenades exploding, constantly shot in all directions. If someone was standing nearby, they would probably be shot into a sieve on the spot. When the frost and snow cleared, only a thick layer of snow was left behind the snow dragon. The snow layer was like soft cotton candy, spreading out on the plateau. It looked like it was at least 10 meters thick. If such a shocking scene was recorded by a camera and uploaded to the internet, it would probably cause a sensation in the world. From the avalanches pouncing to the foot of the mountain, and then to the exhaustion of the power on the plateau, the whole process did not take more than 5 minutes. However, in this short span of 5 minutes, this shocking avalanche destroyed everything within a 10-kilometer radius along its path. After everything calmed down, it was as if there was only a vast expanse of white snow left between heaven and earth. Other than the pure white snow, there was nothing else. And just as the avalanches were wreaking havoc and destroying everything, two figures suddenly appeared on the mountain peak in the distance. It was a man and a woman. The two of them stood on a large rock on the mountain peak, quietly overlooking everything below through the wind and snow. The land of extreme cold, the peak of the snowy mountain. The man wore a pleated long-sleeved shirt that reached his knees, with a slit on his neck and complicated and exquisite decorations, and a long navy blue shawl on his shoulders. The most eye-catching feature was the hat on his head, which was wrapped in a turban. Just like Hua Xiao's Hanfu, this man was actually wearing a traditional Indian costume, toddy. Men wore toddy, and women naturally wore exquisite and gorgeous saris. This woman was about 30 years old. Time did not leave any traces on her face. Chapter 241. Brahma, book creator, Shiva, Mahesvara, and Vishnu, Mahesvara, were known as the three main gods of India. Brahma's position was similar to Pangu, Vishnu was similar to Fushi, and Shiva was similar to Nuwa. Different from Nuwa's compassion, Shiva had one more hobby than Nuwa when he was creating things, and that was destruction. Shiva represented creation and destruction, which was why he was worshipped by the Indians as the main god with the strongest combat power. The huge statue that appeared in front of Chin-shi was obviously not the real Shiva in the legends. It was just an impostor. It was not right to call it an impostor, because this was the cultivation method of the Indians, Dharma. Huaxia's Buddhism came from India, so the cultivation method of Buddhism was also Dharma. However, Chin-shi had only interacted with necromancers and martial artists, so he did not know that Buddhist cultivators had such things as well. The so-called Dharma referred to the appearance of the various Dharma, which was also the external manifestation of mana. The manifestation of Dharma was not used to scare people, but it contained the application of spells. Just like necromancers who would chant spells before making a move, the Brahmin cultivators would reveal Dharma before making a move. The existence of Dharma was similar to a shikigami. It was a manifestation of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth after it was refined into vital essence. It could not be separated from the cultivator, and the cultivator could use it to attack. The lethality of Dharma was not judged by its appearance or size, but with the arrogant personality of the Indians, the bigger and more terrifying the Dharma, the better. Therefore, when fighting with an Indian cultivator, one only needed to see how big and strange the Dharma behind him was. As for Dharma, it was just like the saying, the great Tao was like mercury flowing on the ground, and every grain was round. The cultivation methods on Earth seemed to be very different, but in reality, they were all the same. This Indian was at most at the level of Sun Wen. After being hit by Chin-shi's 1,000 returning swords, even if he did not die, he should be severely injured. But now, he was able to stand up again, and the spirit chi around him was twice as strong as before. This situation immediately aroused Chin-shi's interest. Shiva had thousands of avatars, and the one with the strongest combat power was the half-woman avatar. This kind of spell that could double one's combat strength out of thin air was really scary when he thought about it carefully. If it wasn't Chin-shi who came today but Sun Wen instead, Sun Wen would probably have died on the spot. Chin-shi closed his eyes, trying to figure out the true essence of this spell from the surging of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. After the 30-meter-tall statue of Shiva appeared, it did not hesitate for a moment and directly roared in the direction of Chin-shi. Shiva Natraja. Transliteration, Natraja, Shiva's signature skill. He had 2 heads and 2 mouths, so his roar was naturally very shocking. While it was roaring, the 6 arms of the statue started waving. Although these 6 objects were not all weapons, at this moment, all of them were emitting a strong red light. Immediately after, a red light suddenly appeared at the chest of Shiva's statue. Shiva's third eye actually appeared at his chest. Then, a red pillar of light suddenly shot out from the third eye, heading straight for Chin-shi. Chin-shi had not spent so much effort to figure out something in a long time. In this world, there was nothing that he needed to figure out for a long time. Thus, at the same time that Shiva roared, Chin-shi suddenly opened his eyes and shouted, "Found it!" As his voice fell, the phantom of a giant sword appeared behind him out of thin air. That sword phantom was thousands of feet tall, like a pillar that supported the sky. Its shape was simple, and the sword body was covered in dark diamond-shaped patterns. The sword edge near the sword hilt was cast with strange characters. The blade of the long sword was not straight, and the backbone was clearly formed into a line. The widest part was about 1/3 of the sword hilt, and then it curved inwards, until the sword edge protruded outwards, and then converged inwards into a sharp point. Although it was a phantom, the sword was covered in green light, and it gave people a feeling that it was as cold as ice, and that it could cut through hair. Chin-shi did not seem to see the red light emitted by Shiva's statue. Once the sword phantom appeared, he immediately turned to look at the long sword that had been with him for hundreds of years. "Old friend, it's been a long time." Although it was just a phantom, after seeing the sword, Chin-shi could not help but let out a long cry. The difficulty of returning to Earth from heavenly spiral was not something that ordinary people could imagine. This sword was one of the prices he had to pay to return to Earth. To Qin Shi, this was a price that was even heavier than the damage to his soul and the depletion of his vital energy. The cultivation techniques on Earth were still too shallow for Qin Shi, so through his observation just now, he had a rough idea of the principle of Dharma manifestation. Therefore, he immediately activated his vital energy and created this peerless divine sword that only existed in his memory. This sword was called Heavenly Divination. I have a sword that dares to go against the world. Qin Shi had not been so carefree in a long time. After all, to a man, a happy family and a successful career were his lifelong pursuits. Qin Shi already had the former, and the latter was something that he once had.